The chisel strikes stone before sunrise. In the half-light of a temple court, a workman lifts his hammer and brings it down against a name that has stood for generations. The carved signs form the name of Amun, the hidden god of Thebes, lord of temples, estates, priests, workshops, herds, and memory. A few blows break the surface, a few more turn the divine name into a scar. Nearby, another figure of a god has already lost its face. Elsewhere, plural references to gods are being cut away or altered. Across Egypt, on monuments raised by earlier kings and on inscriptions that once seemed permanent, sacred words are becoming dangerous. This is not the slow damage of weather. It is not ordinary theft or the casual reuse of an old building. Someone has ordered the gods to be edited out of the visible world. The order comes from the throne. Egypt has known conquerors, court struggles, failed reigns, and religious rivalry before. It has absorbed foreign deities, merged divine identities, and allowed local cults to rise beside older ones. Its sacred world is crowded rather than exclusive. Amun can be joined with Re. Osiris rules the dead while Ptah shapes creation. Hathor crosses boundaries of love and danger, and local gods inhabit cities, fields, rivers, deserts, workshops, and homes. Divine power overlaps. It accumulates. It rarely demands that every other name be silenced. Then Akhenaten appears, and the old balance begins to fracture. His revolution does not begin everywhere at once, and it does not unfold in a single clean decree. The evidence survives unevenly, scattered across damaged temples, dismantled walls, reused stone blocks, abandoned houses, royal inscriptions, private tombs, and the later attempts of other kings to erase the eraser. Yet what remains is unmistakable. At some point in Akhenaten's reign, the attack on Amun's name becomes systematic enough to reach beyond a dispute between priests. Images are altered, titles are removed, the language of divine plurality narrows, the king's own name changes, a new capital rises in the desert. Above all stands the Aten, the visible sun disk whose rays end in small hands, reaching toward the royal family with signs of life. Later generations treat Akhenaten not merely as an unpopular predecessor, but as a rupture in the proper order of the world. His monuments are dismantled, his city abandoned, and his name excluded from official king lists. Egypt tries to close the wound by denying that the woundmaker ever ruled. But the attempted silence creates the mystery. Why would a pharaoh, whose authority depends on maintaining harmony between human and divine realms, turn against gods whose worship had supported kingship for centuries? Was Akhenaten moved by a conviction so intense that compromise became impossible? Was he narrowing religion into a theology centered on a single cosmic source? Was he stripping temples of power so divine authority could flow only through the palace? Or were belief and political control so closely fused that separating them creates a distinction Akhenaten himself would not have recognized? Scholars still debate the answer because Akhenaten left behind an abundance of images and declarations, but no private explanation of his mind. His public theology is visible. His interior motives are not. Before we go deeper, like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. To understand the violence of a missing name, it helps to understand what a name meant in ancient Egypt. A name was not merely a label attached to a person or god. It was part of existence itself. To preserve a name was to preserve presence. To speak it was to renew memory. To carve it in stone was to grant it endurance beyond a human lifetime. This is why royal names appear again and again across temples, statues, stelae, tombs, and ritual objects. Repetition protects being. Erasure attacks it. When Akhenaten's agents cut away the name of Amun, they are therefore doing more than modifying official decoration. They are interfering with a divine presence embedded in the monument. The act is symbolic, theological, political, and practical at once. It announces that offerings, wealth, legitimacy, and sacred attention are being redirected. Yet even here, the pattern resists a simple explanation. Not every god is attacked in the same way. Not every old belief disappears. Traditional forms survive in altered contexts. Some private practices continue beneath the official radiance of the Aten. Even objects made for Akhenaten's own burial preserve traces of older Egyptian concern with life after death. No single explanation fully accounts for this mixture of destruction and survival. The phrase Akhenaten's heresy captures how later Egyptians and modern storytellers have imagined the reign as a dangerous deviation from the covenant between Egypt and its gods. But heresy is a word shaped by later traditions. Ancient Egyptian religion had no single church or universal creed. Akhenaten's offense was not simply that he believed something new. It lay in the scale of exclusion, in the elevation of the Aten, and in the pressure placed upon other divine names. The Aten itself is not invented from nothing. The sun disk existed before Akhenaten. Solar theology had deep roots, and earlier kings had already emphasized the life-giving power of sunlight. The revolution grows from existing traditions and then stretches them until they become almost unrecognizable. A familiar solar symbol becomes the center of a royal system. The king and queen stand beneath its rays, receiving life directly. The people do not approach the Aten through a broad landscape of divine personalities. They approach through the royal family, whose position becomes not only political but cosmological. That is why the damaged names matter so much. Every hacked-out sign points toward a new arrangement of access. The old gods had temples, priesthoods, festivals, sacred images, estates, and local communities. The Aten has open courts flooded with sunlight, vast offering tables, and a theology dominated by the king. The revolution does not merely reduce the number of gods, it changes who controls the relationship between heaven and earth. Still, the physical record is incomplete. Many monuments were destroyed, dismantled, or reused by Akhenaten's successors. Much of the surviving imagery comes from elite tombs and official architecture, where royal ideology is strongest. What survives suggests pressure from above, adaptation below, and a society less uniform than official art pretends. Imagine the first moment when someone notices that Amun's name has vanished from a wall. Perhaps the change is understood immediately. Perhaps it spreads first as rumour the king favours the Aten. The old temples are losing standing. Certain words are no longer safe. Priests, scribes, craftsmen, soldiers, farmers, and officials do not all experience the change in the same way. For some, it may promise advancement. For others, it threatens inherited offices, local identity, and the rituals through which families have understood life and death. For many, survival probably requires silence and adjustment, the most durable skills in any royal revolution. Above them all, the sun rises exactly as it always has. Its light touches the Nile, the fields, the temple pylons, and the fresh scars where divine names once stood. Akhenaten sees in that light a truth powerful enough to reorder Egypt. His successors will see catastrophe. Between those judgments lies one of the strangest reigns in the ancient world, not the simple birth of monotheism, not merely a political coup against priests, and not only the madness of an isolated king, but a deliberate attempt to rebuild reality around a single radiant center. To see how such an attempt became possible, the story must return to the Egypt that existed before the chisels began their work, when Amun's name was not yet forbidden and the old god still seemed beyond the reach of any pharaoh. Before Amun's name becomes a target, it stands at the center of one of the richest and most adaptable sacred systems the ancient world has known. Egypt does not imagine divinity as a neat assembly of separate beings with fixed responsibilities. Its gods overlap, merge, divide, borrow one another's titles, and change emphasis from one city or century to another. Amun can become Amun-Re, joining the hidden power of Thebes with the visible force of the sun. Re can be linked with Horus. Osiris can embody the dead king while Horus embodies the living one. A single temple wall may hold several explanations of creation without requiring one to destroy the others. Contradiction is not necessarily failure. It can be another way of approaching a reality too large for one image. At the heart of this world lies Maat, the principle of balance, truth, right order, and proper relationship. Maat is not merely an abstract moral idea. It is what keeps the Nile flowing within its rhythms, the sun returning after darkness, the state functioning, offerings reaching the gods, and the boundary between order and chaos from collapsing. The pharaoh's highest responsibility is to maintain it. Every temple scene in which a king presents incense, food, wine, flowers, or a small figure of Maat communicates the same political theology. Egypt survives because the ruler keeps the divine and human worlds aligned. The king is therefore not simply a politician who happens to sponsor religion. Kingship itself is sacred. Yet the pharaoh cannot personally perform every ritual in every sanctuary from the Delta to Nubia. Priests act on his behalf. Their service does not normally place them outside royal authority. In theory, they extend it. Inside the most restricted chambers, they awaken the cult image, wash and clothe it, present food, burn incense, recite formulas, and then seal the sanctuary again. The deity statue is not worshipped as ordinary stone. Through consecration and ritual, it becomes a place where divine presence can reside. Most people never enter those dark inner rooms. Their encounters with major gods often occur during festivals, when sacred images leave their sanctuaries in portable shrines carried on ceremonial boats. At Thebes, Amun's gilded bark moves through crowds during great processions such as the Opet festival. The journey links Karnak with Luxor Temple and publicly renews the relationship between Amun and the reigning king. Music, incense, banners, offerings, officials, and spectators transform theology into movement. For a brief time, the hidden god becomes visible through veils, ritual objects, and the immense machinery of celebration. Amun's very name is commonly understood to suggest the hidden or concealed one. That hiddenness makes him unusually flexible. He is not limited to one visible form. Joined with he becomes both unseen source and manifest sunlight, an invisible power whose effects fill the world. The rulers of the early 18th dynasty credit Amun with supporting their victories and the restoration of Egyptian power after the expulsion of the Hyksos. As the empire expands south into Nubia and northeast into the Levant, wealth flows toward royal building programs and major temples. Karnak grows into a monumental landscape of pylons, courts, obelisks, chapels, sacred lakes, storerooms, workshops, administrative rooms, and processional routes. Its scale can mislead modern observers. The Temple of Amun is not only a place of prayer in the narrow sense, it is also an economic institution. It controls land, receives tribute and donations, stores grain, employs workers, manages livestock, sponsors craft production, and participates in the redistribution of resources. Temples throughout Egypt perform similar functions on different scales. Their estates support priests, scribes, farmers, brewers, bakers, herders, sailors, stoneworkers, metalworkers, and guards. Religion is woven into the economy so thoroughly that separating sacred wealth from state wealth becomes difficult. This is the world Akhenaten inherits, but it is important not to turn the priesthood of Amun into a ready-made enemy government. Popular accounts sometimes imagine a direct contest between a powerless king and an almost independent church. The reality is less theatrical. High priests are often appointed from elite families closely connected to the court. Temple offices can reward royal servants and strengthen networks of loyalty. Pharaohs themselves enrich Amun's institutions and use the god's prestige to reinforce kingship. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how independently the great temples could act in different reigns. Influence does not automatically mean opposition. Even so, concentrated wealth creates concentrated authority. Amun's priests possess administrative reach, inherited expertise, and access to a divine institution whose history is older than any living king. Oracles associated with divine processions can validate decisions. Temple personnel preserve archives and ritual knowledge. Major festivals shape the ceremonial calendar. If a ruler wishes to redirect sacred resources, redefine divine access, or place himself more visibly at the center of worship, Amun's establishment cannot be ignored. The reign of Amenhotep III, Akhenaten's father, makes the inherited landscape even more complex. Egypt is powerful, wealthy, and internationally connected. Foreign rulers correspond with the court, exchange luxury gifts, negotiate marriages, and compete for access to Egyptian gold. At home, Amenhotep III builds on a grand scale. His monuments stretch from Nubia to the Delta, while the Theban West Bank becomes the setting for a vast mortuary temple, whose surviving seated colossi still dominate the plain. His kingship also carries increasingly intense solar language. The king celebrates multiple said festivals, ceremonies of royal renewal traditionally associated with long rule and rejuvenated power. He's presented with divine qualities during his lifetime, and solar imagery becomes especially prominent. The Aten appears in royal language before Akhenaten elevates it to unprecedented status. One of Amenhotep III's palaces is called the House of Rejoicing in the Aten, and royal objects can refer to the sun disk in ways that prepare the vocabulary later transformed by his son. This continuity matters. Akhenaten does not emerge from a theological emptiness. He grows up in a court already fascinated by solar power, divine kingship, monumental spectacle, and the universal reach of Egypt's ruler. The language of sunlight offers something politically attractive. Unlike a local god confined in imagination to one city, the sun shines over Egypt and foreign lands alike. Its rays cross borders without permission. Its daily appearance seems immediate, visible, and universal. Yet the older system is also capable of absorbing that idea. Amun-Re can already be praised as a universal creator whose power reaches distant peoples. Solar theology does not require the destruction of other gods. Under Amenhotep III, multiplicity and royal solar emphasis coexist. The future rupture lies not in noticing the sun's universal force, but in deciding that this force must stand above, and eventually against, the crowded divine world around it. Life across Egypt remains anchored in that older sacred diversity. A household may seek protection from Bez or Taweret, healing from Sekhmet, fertility from Hathor, wisdom from Thoth, and hope for the afterlife through Osiris, local shrines, ancestor practices, amulets, household images, and festival participation connect formal temple religion to ordinary experience. These habits are not easily erased by decree because they are not only beliefs, they are routines, inherited gestures, family memories, and practical responses to uncertainty. The dead also depend upon continuity. Tombs contain prayers, images, offerings, and names meant to sustain existence beyond death. Osiris provides a powerful model of regeneration. The sun god's nightly journey through darkness offers another. Egyptian afterlife thought combines multiple traditions rather than forcing a single doctrine. A person may hope to join Osiris, travel with the sun, receive offerings, and remain present through the preservation of the body and name. This system is layered because eternity is too important to trust to one path. Against this background, Akhenaten's later restrictions become more than a change in official preference. They threaten an ecosystem of meaning. To elevate the Aten is one thing. Egyptian kings have always promoted particular gods. To narrow acceptable divine language, damage names, close or weaken cults, and redirect worship through the royal family is something far more disruptive. But before any god loses a name, there is a prince named Amenhotep, bearing within his own identity the declaration that Amun is satisfied. He grows up surrounded by a father who shines with solar majesty, a formidable queen, an international court, and temples whose wealth appears inseparable from Egypt's greatness. Nothing in the surviving record tells us exactly when he begins to see this inherited world as insufficient. What survives instead is a sequence of changes, hesitant at first, then increasingly difficult to reverse. The revolution begins not with Akhenaten, but with Amenhotep IV, a royal son standing beneath the sacred shadows of the very system he will one day try to transform. The future Akhenaten enters history almost as a shadow. Before he becomes the most recognizable pharaoh of the Amarna age, Amenhotep IV leaves surprisingly few clear traces as a prince. The surviving record does not preserve a detailed childhood, a sequence of early portraits, or a private education that explains the ruler he later becomes. There is no reliable ancient account of a young prince staring at the sun and rejecting the gods around him. Most reconstructions begin with fragments, family relationships, court traditions, monuments from his father's reign, and the sudden appearance of a king whose religious priorities soon become impossible to miss. Even his path to the throne may not have been expected. Amenhotep III appears to have had an older son named Thutmose, identified in surviving inscriptions as the king's eldest son and associated with high office at Memphis. Thutmose served as high priest of Ptah, connecting the royal family to one of Egypt's oldest and most important religious centers. A small stone object made for his cat, complete with funerary language, provides an oddly intimate trace of a prince who otherwise disappears from history. At some point, probably before Amenhotep III's death, Thutmose vanishes from the record. His death is usually inferred, though the circumstances remain unknown. Amenhotep, the younger prince who may once have stood behind him in the succession, becomes heir to the most powerful throne in the Eastern Mediterranean. He is born into a family already reshaping the public image of kingship. His father, Amenhotep III, does not merely rule Egypt. He surrounds himself with an atmosphere of divine radiance. Colossal statues, temples, palace complexes, commemorative scarabs, and jubilee celebrations project a kingship that seems larger than the ordinary human scale. The king said festivals renew his strength through ritual. while inscriptions and images increasingly associate him with solar gods and divine manifestations. By the later years of the reign, Amenhotep III is not simply favoured by the gods. In some contexts, he is treated as divine during his own lifetime. The young prince therefore grows up in a court where royal divinity is not an abstract doctrine. It is architecture, ceremony, costume, incense, music, diplomatic theatre, and controlled access. It is visible in the massive pylons of temples, the glittering surfaces of palace halls, and the carefully arranged appearances of the royal family. The pharaoh stands between Egypt and the divine world. But under Amenhotep III, that position becomes increasingly radiant and self-conscious. At the centre of the court beside him stands Queen Ptah, Akhenaten's mother. Ptah's parents, Yuya and Juyu, were not themselves king and queen, but they belonged to a powerful elite family. Their exceptionally rich tomb in the Valley of the Kings reflects their extraordinary standing. Ptah becomes great royal wife early in Amenhotep III's reign, and appears with a prominence unusual even for an Egyptian queen. Her name is included on royal commemorative objects. She participates visibly in state ideology. Foreign rulers know who she is, and later diplomatic correspondence treats her as a figure with knowledge of earlier agreements between courts. Her importance matters when considering the world that shaped Amenhotep IV. He does not grow up in a household where queens are silent ceremonial figures. Ptah embodies political continuity, dynastic authority, and close participation in royal representation. She survives into her son's reign and appears at Akhetaten, suggesting that the relationship between the old court and the new order is more continuous than later stories of total rupture imply. The royal family is extensive. Amenhotep IV has several sisters, including Sitamun, Isis, Henutaneb, and Nebeta, though the precise identification of every royal daughter remains difficult. Some receive prominent titles and ceremonial roles during their father's reign. The palace is filled not only with relatives but with administrators, priests, foreign envoys, scribes, craftsmen, musicians, guards, attendants, and officials whose careers depend upon reading the changing language of royal favour. This court is also international. Letters and gifts arrive from Babylonia, Mitanni, Assyria, Anatolia, Cyprus, and the rulers of smaller Levantine states. Exotic materials move through palace storerooms: gold, lapis lazuli, ivory, fine textiles, oils, horses, metals, and crafted vessels. Foreign princesses enter diplomatic marriages. Messengers carry requests, complaints, and elaborate expressions of royal brotherhood. Amenhotep IV grows up at the centre of a world in which Egypt's king is treated as one of a small group of great rulers, yet claims a sacred status that foreign monarchs do not express in quite the same way. The palace complex at Malkata, on the western bank of Thebes, offers one possible setting for his youth. Built and expanded during Amenhotep III's later reign, it contains ceremonial spaces, residences, administrative areas, storerooms, and decorated floors alive with images of nature and foreign captives. Nearby lies a vast artificial harbour known today as Birket Habu, probably connected with royal ceremonies and transportation. The scale of the complex reveals a court capable of creating an entire ritual landscape around the person of the king. The prince would also have witnessed the immense religious geography of Thebes. Across the river, Karnak continues to grow. Amun's temples receive royal patronage and imperial wealth. Processions connect sanctuaries and palace ideology. On the western bank, mortuary temples prepare kings for eternal divine existence. The cliffs beyond conceal royal tombs. The landscape itself seems organized around the cooperation of gods, temples, ancestors, and kingship. Nothing proves that the young Amenhotep experiences this world as oppressive. It may initially have appeared to him as the natural structure of reality. Later hostility toward Amun does not mean he was raised outside Amun's religious system. His birth name, Amenhotep, means that Amun is satisfied. His royal identity begins as an affirmation of the god he will later attack. The forces that influenced his transformation remain uncertain. Some scholars look toward the strong solar theology of Amenhotep III's reign. Others emphasize the growing divinization of the living king. Some consider the political weight of temple institutions, while others see a genuine religious vision centered on the visible sun. The influence of Queen Tea, royal theologians, priests of solar cults, or particular court officials has also been proposed. The evidence remains incomplete, and no surviving document identifies a teacher or advisor who supplied the program later called Atenism. Nefertiti's origins are similarly obscure. She becomes Amenhotep IV's great royal wife, and one of the defining figures of his reign, but her parents are not securely identified. A connection to the courtier A has often been suggested, partly because Ai's wife, Te, held the title of nurse of the great royal wife. Yet this does not prove that Ai was Nefertiti's father. Her name, commonly understood as the Beautiful One has come, once encouraged theories of foreign origin, but the name alone is not reliable evidence. What survives in the record suggests that she was closely integrated into the Egyptian court and quickly assumed a religious and political prominence that exceeded conventional expectations. The date and circumstances of Amenhotep IV's accession are also debated. He likely takes the throne in the 14th century BCE after the long reign of Amenhotep III, but scholars disagree over whether father and son ruled together for any meaningful period. Proposed co-regencies range from none at all to several years. Images, inscriptions, and altered monuments have been interpreted in competing ways, and no single explanation has ended the argument. The question matters because a long co-regency could place Amenhotep IV's earliest religious experiments under his father's living authority, while a sole accession would make the changes more clearly his own. Yet either possibility leaves the central continuity intact. The new king inherits a court already saturated with solar imagery and royal divinity. At first, he does not appear as a destroyer of tradition. He ascends the throne as Amenhotep IV, using a name devoted to Amun. His early royal titles fit established forms. He rules from the Theban world and begins building at Karnak within the sacred territory of the god his later agents will attempt to erase. The first changes are therefore not announced from a distant desert capital. They begin inside the old religious heart of Egypt, beneath the walls and obelisks of Karnak, where a familiar sun disk is about to acquire a new name, a new body of ritual, and a place above every god that came before it. At Karnak, the revolution first takes architectural form. Amenhotep IV does not begin by abandoning Thebes. He begins by building within it, close to the immense sacred complex of Amun. But the buildings he raises do not behave like the temples around them. Their walls are assembled from small sandstone blocks now called talatat, standardized pieces that can be transported and set rapidly. The method allows construction to proceed at unusual speed, as though the new cult cannot wait for the slow monumental rhythms of earlier reigns. The structures are dedicated to the Aten. This sun disk is not yet the abstract symbol it later becomes in popular memory. The Aten already has a history. Egyptian texts before Amenhotep IV can use the word for the physical disk of the sun, and earlier royal theology had drawn attention to the sun's visible light, its movement across the sky, and its universal reach. Under Amenhotep III, the Aten appears in palace names, royal epithets, and language that connects the king to solar radiance. None of this requires the rejection of Amun, Ptah, Osiris, or the rest of Egypt's gods. The sun disk exists comfortably within a crowded divine universe. Amenhotep IV changes the balance. In the earliest phase of his reign, the Aten is presented with a formal royal-style name enclosed in cartouches. The oval frames normally used for the names of kings. The deity's identity is expressed through a long title describing reshape, who rejoices in the horizon, in his name of light that is in the Aten. The wording still draws upon older divine forms. Reshape links the sun god Re with Horus of the horizon. Shu, the god of air and light, may also remain present in some early formulations. The new theology has not yet severed every connection with traditional religion, but the cartouches reveal a striking development. Aten is being treated almost like a ruling sovereign. The god has a titulary. The god's name can be celebrated in anniversaries. The god possesses temples, estates, offerings, and servants. Amenhotep IV is not simply honouring a deity favoured by the crown. He is constructing a relationship in which Aten reigns in the heavens, while the pharaoh serves as the god's unique earthly counterpart. At Karnak, this relationship becomes visible in vast open courts. Traditional Egyptian temples often lead worshippers inward through progressively darker and more restricted spaces. Massive pylons open into courts, halls of columns, and finally a secluded sanctuary where the cult image rests in controlled darkness. The architecture turns access into a journey from public brightness towards sacred concealment. Aten temples reverse the emphasis. The god is sunlight itself, or at least divine power made visible through the sun's rays. It requires no dark chamber in which a statue is awakened each morning. Its presence arrives from above. Roofless courts allow light to fall directly upon altars and offerings. Rows of tables may be piled with bread, meat, fruit, vegetables, flowers, wine, beer, and incense, transforming the visible abundance of Egypt into nourishment presented beneath the open sky. The Aten does not inhabit a statue in quite the old manner. Its most recognizable image is the solar disk extending long rays downward, each ray ending in a human hand. Some hands hold the Ankh, the sign of life, near the faces of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Others reach toward offerings or touch the royal body. The image is both simple and strange. The god has no walking body, no animal head, no hidden sanctuary form. It remains high above, touching the world through light. Yet the hands do not reach everyone equally. They concentrate upon the royal family. This is one of the defining features of the emerging system. Traditional temple scenes also place the pharaoh between gods and humanity, and official theology always grants the king privileged access. Amenhotep IV pushes that privilege toward exclusivity. The Aten gives life directly to the king and queen. Officials receive divine favour through loyalty to them. Private tomb owners praise the king, depict the royal family, and present themselves as beneficiaries of royal generosity. Aten may illuminate all lands, but knowledge of Aten is concentrated in one person. The king. This arrangement complicates the label of monotheism. If Atenism is understood simply as belief in one god, the evidence does not fit neatly at every stage. Older divine names and concepts continue to appear during the early reign. The Aten's formal title itself initially incorporates traditional solar deities. Other cults do not vanish at once. The movement develops over time, and scholars still debate where to draw the line between strong preference, exclusive worship, and a fully articulated denial of other gods. What is clearer is that the royal monopoly intensifies. Atenism places the king at the center of cosmic knowledge. The great hymn to the Aten, preserved in a private tomb at Akhetaten, later praises the sun as creator and sustainer of life across the world. It describes foreign lands, animals, plants, human speech, birth, sleep, awakening, and the Nile under the Aten's universal care. Yet the hymn also insists that only the king truly knows the god. Universal light and restricted knowledge exist side by side. At Karnak, the new emphasis is already visible in images of royal ritual. Amenhotep IV appears repeatedly before Aten, accompanied by Nefertiti and their daughters. Scenes are carved with a speed and rhythm suited to Talitat construction. The royal family performs offerings, participates in festivals, and occupies space once dominated by a wider assembly of gods. The king also celebrates a Sed festival unusually early in his reign. Traditionally, this jubilee marks royal renewal after about 30 years, though exceptions exist. Amenhotep IV's early celebration may be connected not simply to his own rejuvenation, but to the kingship of Aten. The event suggests that the new cult is acquiring not only temples, but a ceremonial calendar and a language of sovereign rule. Some of the most unusual buildings at Karnak carry names that can be translated approximately as the Aten is found. In the estate of the Aten or exalted are the monuments of the Aten forever. Their exact arrangement remains difficult to reconstruct because later kings dismantled them. Thousands of Talitat blocks were reused as filling inside pylons and other structures, preserving fragments while destroying the original compositions. Modern researchers face an enormous stone puzzle: a hand, a face, a ray of sunlight, a line of offering bearers, a royal cartouche, each displaced from the wall where it once belonged. That reuse is one of the ironies of Akhenaten's legacy. His successors tried to make his monuments disappear by hiding their stones inside new construction. In doing so, they protected many of them from complete erosion. The revolution survives because it was buried. The fragments reveal Nefertiti performing rituals with remarkable prominence. In some scenes, she appears at a scale and in roles that approach those of the king. She offers to Aten, participates in the cult, and may even be shown striking enemies in the traditional pose of royal domination. Her importance is not decorative. From the beginning, the emerging theology depends upon a sacred family structure, Aten above, king and queen below, royal daughters within the descending rays. The domestic intimacy of later Amarna art grows from this arrangement. The royal family is not shown merely because artists suddenly become interested in private affection. Their family unity carries theological weight. The Aten creates and sustains life. Akhenaten and Nefertiti embody that life in visible human form. Their daughters reinforce fertility, continuity, and divine blessing. What appears personal is also political and ritual. Still, Amenhotep IV has not yet broken completely with the old order. His early monuments stand at Karnak, near Amun's domain. His own birth name still honours Amun. The Aten's title still carries traces of older solar theology. This is a phase of elevation, not yet total exclusion, but the direction is clear. The sun disk is no longer one manifestation among many. It is becoming the organizing center of royal ideology. Temple architecture is opening to its light. Ritual is narrowing around the royal household. Divine sovereignty is being rewritten in cartouches. The pharaoh is turning a visible feature of the sky into the foundation of a new sacred order. Soon, even his own name will become incompatible with the world he is building. Amenhotep, the man whose identity declares that Amun is satisfied, will abandon that name and take another Akhenaten, the one effective for the Aten. The change will mark the point at which preference becomes confrontation. The name Amenhotep IV carries a problem that can no longer be ignored. Every time it is spoken, carved, stamped, or written, it declares that Amun is satisfied. Yet the king is steadily building a religious order in which Amun has less and less room to exist. Sometime around the 5th year of his reign, the contradiction is resolved. Amenhotep IV becomes Akhenaten. The exact meaning of the new name is difficult to capture in a single English phrase. It is often rendered as effective for the Aten, he who is beneficial to the Aten, or the effective spirit of the Aten. Whatever translation is preferred, its purpose is unmistakable. The king removes Amun from his identity and binds himself publicly to the sun disk. A royal name is never merely personal in Egypt. It is a declaration of legitimacy, divine relationship, and political intention. By changing his, the pharaoh announces that the center of his reign has shifted. The transformation is not cosmetic. Royal names appear everywhere on temple walls, boundary markers, statues, seals, rings, pottery, administrative objects, and the products of state workshops. To alter the king's name means altering the language through which government itself is made visible. Officials must learn the new forms. Scribes must reproduce them correctly. Craftsmen must carve them into fresh stone. The state begins repeating Akhenaten's commitment thousands of times. The king's broader titulary also changes in emphasis. Egyptian pharaohs possess several formal names linking them to Horus, kingship, cosmic order, and the gods. Akhenaten reshapes this inherited system without abandoning it completely. He remains pharaoh, ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt, guardian of Maat, and living centre of the state. His revolution does not abolish kingship, it enlarges its sacred monopoly. The Aten's own name changes as well. In its earlier form, the deity's long title contains references to Rehorakti and Shu, preserving recognizable links to the older solar pantheon. Later, the title is revised so that these divine names disappear or become less explicit. The Aten is described through the language of the living sun, the horizon, and light rather than through association with other gods. This second formulation appears to narrow the theology further. Even the Aten's genealogy is being purified of divine company. Scholars still debate exactly when each alteration occurred and how consistently the new forms were applied. The surviving inscriptions come from different moments, and later destruction has disturbed their sequence. What remains in the record suggests an accelerating process, rather than a fully formed doctrine imposed on the first day of the reign. Akhenaten's ideas harden over time. The most dramatic sign of that hardening is his decision to leave Thebes. On the east bank of the Nile, Karnak is saturated with the presence of Amun. Every pylon, courtyard, processional route, archive, workshop, and priestly office carries generations of institutional memory. Akhenaten has built 10 temples there, but he has built them within a landscape that continually reminds Egypt of older divine claims. Even a pharaoh cannot easily make Karnak forget what it is. The king therefore chooses a place that, according to his own official account, belongs to no god, goddess, ruler, or official. In a broad desert bay in Middle Egypt, cliffs curve around an open plain beside the river. The eastern horizon forms a natural break in the rock. a shape that can resemble the hieroglyph for the horizon where the sun rises between two mountains. Here, Akhenaten establishes Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. Boundary stelae carved into the surrounding cliffs define the sacred territory. On them, the king presents the foundation of the city not as a practical administrative decision, but as a command or revelation associated with Aten. The inscriptions describe temples, royal residences, tombs, and estates to be created within the new domain. Akhenaten swears that he will not extend or reduce its boundaries and declares his intention to be buried there. The language is absolute, but it must be read carefully. Royal inscriptions are ideological performances, not private diaries. They portray decisions as sacred necessities and suppress compromise, negotiation, and inconvenience. The claim that the site belonged to no previous god is especially powerful because it makes the city appear free of inherited religious claims. Whether the landscape was truly unused in every practical sense is less important than the message Akhetaten begins without an ancient temple establishment that can rival its founder. The city is also placed roughly between Memphis in the north and Thebes in the south. Its location offers access to the Nile and to the administrative movement of people and goods. Yet the symbolic geography dominates its presentation. Akhetaten is conceived as a sacred theatre open to the sun, a place where the king can rebuild court, temple, and city according to the logic of Aten. The move is an extraordinary act of royal will. Capitals in Egypt are not simply chosen and completed like private houses. A functioning court requires palaces, roads, temples, archives, warehouses, docks, bakeries, workshops, barracks, housing, water systems, administrative offices, and food supply networks. Officials must relocate households, labourers must quarry stone, shape bricks, plaster walls, paint surfaces, and carry materials. Priests, scribes, soldiers, artisans, servants, merchants, and farmers become part of a migration organised from above. The new name and new city reinforce one another. Amenhotep IV belonged to a world in which Amun's satisfaction could be written into the identity of the king. Akhenaten belongs to a place built to prove that Aten alone defines the horizon. Around this time, the hostility toward Amun grows more visible. The precise timing and administration of the campaign remain uncertain, but Amun's name is cut from monuments in many locations. Images and references connected with the god are damaged. In some inscriptions, even the hieroglyphic plural for gods is altered, suggesting that the problem extends beyond one rival cult. Mut, the consort of Amun, and other deities associated with the Theban system may also be targeted. The attacks can reach into the names of earlier kings, including Akhenaten's own father, when those names contain the offending divine element. This creates a remarkable tension. Egyptian kingship depends heavily upon honouring ancestors and preserving royal monuments. Akhenaten's campaign damages inscriptions that help sustain the memory of previous rulers, including members of his dynasty. Ideological purity is beginning to override ordinary reverence for the past. Yet the persecution is not perfectly uniform. Some divine names survive. Traditional objects continue to be made or used. Household religion cannot be reconstructed from royal decrees alone. The reach of the campaign probably varies by region, institution, and moment. It is safer to imagine sustained pressure and selective destruction than a single night in which every temple in Egypt suddenly closes. No surviving order tells ordinary Egyptians exactly what they are permitted to believe in private. The state's actions are clearest in official space monuments, temples, royal workshops, public inscriptions, and elite careers. There, conformity matters. Officials seeking advancement describe loyalty to Akhenaten and gratitude for his favour. Their tombs at the new city place the royal family beneath the rays of Aten, while the tomb owners receive reward from the palace. The king now stands between every loyal subject and the source of life. This is why the reform can be interpreted both as theology and strategy. Akhenaten may sincerely believe that Aten is the ultimate creator and that other divine forms obscure the truth. At the same time, the system reduces the independence of traditional temples and concentrates sacred authority around the crown. These outcomes are not mutually exclusive. In the ancient state, belief and power are not separate rooms. The surprising detail is that Akhenaten does not present himself as a humble prophet pointing away from kingship. He makes kingship more essential than ever. The Aten is universal, but access to its meaning is narrow. The sun shines on all humanity, yet the king alone claims to know the god fully. Nefertiti stands beside him as the indispensable female counterpart in this sacred structure. Their family becomes the living image of creation renewed beneath the rays. The revolution has crossed a threshold. A favoured cult has become a new order. A royal preference has become a challenge to inherited memory. The pharaoh has changed his name, redrawn sacred geography, and begun cutting rival gods from stone. Now the desert city must rise quickly enough to make the vision real. Akhetaten rises with the speed of an emergency. The desert bay chosen by Akhenaten is not empty in the absolute sense, but it lacks the monumental weight of Thebes. There are no ancient temple estates dominating the plain, no long procession of kings claiming sacred ground, no immense priesthood with centuries of inherited authority. The site offers something rarer than fertile land or defensive strength. It offers ideological space. The king can begin again. Along the cliffs, boundary stelae mark the limits of the new domain. Their inscriptions do more than define territory. They transform geography into theology. The cliffs become the walls of a sacred horizon, the river the western edge of a royal landscape, and the opening in the eastern mountains a natural image of sunrise. Akhenaten presents the selection as an act guided by Aten rather than as a compromise between transport, administration, and symbolism. The city is not simply placed in the desert, it is revealed there. Once the boundaries are declared, the practical problem becomes immense. A capital cannot survive on revelation. It needs grain, water, bricks, timber, stone, animals, boats, roads, tools, storage, and thousands of people willing or compelled to move. The Nile makes large-scale transport possible, but nearly everything must still be organized. Officials arrive with their households, scribes establish offices, craftsmen construct palaces, temples, villas, workshops, and tombs. Labourers cut blocks, carry baskets, plaster walls, dig wells, shape mud bricks, and clear roads beneath the sun that the new theology praises with unusual intensity. The building process depends heavily on speed. Mud brick forms the basic fabric of much of the city. It can be made from Nile mud, straw, and local material, then dried rather than fired. Stone is reserved for columns, doorways, thresholds, temples, reliefs, and structures where royal imagery requires permanence. The small talatat blocks already used at Karnak remain suited to rapid construction. Their standardized size allows teams to work efficiently, though the later dismantling of Aten buildings will reveal how easily rapid architecture can be taken apart. The city develops along a broad north-south road running roughly parallel to the river. This route, often called the Royal Road, binds together palace, temple, administrative, and residential districts. It is not a modern avenue planned for ordinary traffic alone. It is a ceremonial line through which the royal family can become visible. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their daughters travel between residences and temples in chariots, beneath the open sky and before watching officials. Their movement forms part of the city's sacred rhythm. Aten shines above. The royal household moves below. The population witnesses the link. Near the centre stands the official heart of Akhetaten. The great palace spreads across a vast area, with courtyards, columned halls, storerooms, ceremonial spaces, and painted surfaces. Fragments suggest floors decorated with pools, plants, birds, and bound foreign enemies, combining images of controlled nature with the political order of empire. Nearby, a bridge crosses the royal road, connecting parts of the palace complex. A window set into this elevated structure becomes one of the most distinctive stages of Amarna kingship. From the window of appearance, the royal family rewards favoured officials. Tomb scenes show Akhenaten and Nefertiti leaning outward, while collars of gold are presented below. Rays of Aten descend upon the king and queen, and royal favour descends from them to loyal servants. The architecture turns reward into theology. Wealth does not merely come from the treasury, it flows through the sacred family. Political advancement becomes visible proof of harmony with Aten's chosen ruler. Close by stands the king's house, a more compact royal and administrative complex linked with the palace by the bridge. Its walls once carried scenes of the royal family, foreign tribute, and daily palace activity. Administrative documents, including fragments of the international correspondence now known as the Amarna letters, were found in the broader central city area. Their presence is a reminder that the new capital does not exist outside ordinary government. While Akhenaten reconstructs divine order, scribes continue handling disputes, gifts, marriages, alliances, and complaints from across the eastern Mediterranean. The Great Aten Temple dominates the sacred centre. Its layout differs sharply from the inward darkness of many traditional sanctuaries. A sequence of open courts exposes ritual space to the sky. Hundreds of offering tables fill parts of the complex, allowing food, drink, incense, flowers, and other goods to be laid beneath the sun's rays. The temple is monumental, but its god cannot be confined within a statue chamber. The roofless design makes the entire sky a kind of sanctuary. The scale of offering creates its own practical world. Bread must be baked, beer must be brewed, animals must be managed, produce must be delivered and counted, priests and workers must maintain the grounds, storerooms and service buildings support the ritual display. The worship of a universal sun requires a very earthly bureaucracy. A smaller temple, often called the Small Aten Temple, stands closer to the king's house. It may serve more restricted royal rites and perhaps function as a more intimate counterpart to the enormous state complex. Together, the temples show that Atenism is not without ritual, priesthood, or offerings. Akhenaten does not replace organized religion with private contemplation of sunlight. He constructs a new temple system centered on a god without a traditional cult statue and a king whose participation remains indispensable. Farther north, royal residences occupy more secluded ground. The North Palace, associated in later phases with the royal daughter Meritaten, contains gardens, courts, animal enclosures, and richly decorated rooms. Nature appears carefully arranged within palace architecture, echoing a theology in which Aten creates and sustains every living thing. Birds, fish, cattle, plants, and pools do not merely decorate the space. They make creation visible around the royal household, The North Riverside Palace, now largely lost beneath cultivation and modern change, may have been one of the principal royal residences. Its position close to the river would have supported movement by boat and separated the court from the denser central city. Akhetaten is therefore not a single compact settlement. It stretches along the plain in a series of ceremonial, residential, administrative, and industrial zones. Elite villas emerge throughout the suburbs. High officials build large compounds with reception halls, private rooms, storerooms, kitchens, gardens, granaries, servant quarters, and sometimes small shrines. Around them stand more modest houses, workshops, and irregular clusters of dwellings. The city is planned in its sacred and royal core, but much residential growth is less controlled. Streets bend around earlier buildings. Smaller homes press against larger estates. Akhenaten can define the horizon, but daily urban life refuses perfect geometry. To the east lies the workman's village, an enclosed settlement associated with those cutting and decorating tombs in the cliffs. Nearby, another community known as the Stone Village adds complexity to the organization of labor. These settlements show that the city's sacred image depends on specialized workers living at its edges, separated from the royal center but essential to its completion. Water presents a constant challenge. Akhetaten lies beside the Nile, yet much of the city is set back from the river. Wells must be dug, jars carried, and supplies managed. The climate is dry, shade is limited, streets are unpaved, dust moves through unfinished buildings. The radiant capital praised in tomb scenes is also a construction zone filled with noise, waste, animals, scaffolding, and people improvising shelter beside monuments still being painted. This contrast is crucial. Official images present the city as if a tens order has descended complete from the sky. Archaeology reveals adaptation, inequality, unfinished work, and ordinary disorder. Some buildings are grand, others are cramped. Some residents enjoy gardens and imported luxury materials, others occupy small houses beside industrial debris. What survives in the record suggests that Akhetaten grows quickly because resources and labor are concentrated there, not because the desert itself becomes effortless. The eastern cliffs hold another essential part of the planned tombs for the royal family and high officials. Akhenaten breaks with the custom of royal burial in the Valley of the Kings and orders a royal tomb cut into a remote desert valley within Aten's domain. The elite tombs lining the cliffs display hymns, palace ceremonies, temple scenes, foreign tribute, and the royal family beneath the rays. They are less concerned with the traditional journey through the underworld than many earlier tombs, though older beliefs do not disappear entirely. Akhetaten is designed to contain the king's life, government, worship, memory, and death. For a brief period, it works. Boats unload goods, temples receive offerings, officials crowd the royal road, palaces glitter with painted plaster, tombs expand into the cliffs. The new capital becomes the most concentrated expression of Akhenaten's vision ever created. But cities are not sustained by symbolism alone. Behind the sunlight, thousands of residents must eat, work, worship, raise families, protect their health, and make sense of a sacred revolution that may not have been their own. The people who inhabit Akhetaten do not live inside a theological diagram. They live in houses that leak dust, beside courtyards where grain is ground. Animals are tethered, tools are repaired, and water is carried through streets under the same relentless sun that official hymns celebrate as the source of all life. From a distance, the city appears to be built around the royal family. up close. It depends upon thousands of ordinary routines. At dawn, the first movements begin in kitchens, bakeries, workshops, storerooms, and service yards. Fires are lit, dough is mixed, grain is crushed on grinding stones, jars are opened and counted, donkeys carry loads through narrow lanes. Officials prepare documents, labourers gather tools, and temple personnel organise offerings that must appear abundant when placed before Aten. The god may shine universally, but the cult that honours him requires deliveries, accounting, storage, and disciplined work. Bread and beer remain the foundations of the urban food supply. Their production is neither simple nor invisible. Grain must arrive from fields beyond the desert plain, much of it transported by river. It passes through estates, warehouses, and administrative systems before reaching households and institutions. Bakers shape loaves in several forms, while brewers transform grain into a drink that provides both nourishment and a dependable part of the daily ration. Fish, vegetables, dates, onions, lentils, oils, and occasional meat add variety, though access differs sharply according to status. The Great Aten Temple consumes food on a scale designed to be seen. Rows of offering tables receive piles of bread, cuts of meat, fruit, flowers, beer, wine, and incense. Reliefs show abundance with almost obsessive repetition. Tables overflow. Storehouses appear full. Processions carry provisions towards sacred courts. The message is clear beneath Aten and the king. Egypt is fertile, ordered, and generous. What happens to the offerings after presentation is less visible in the official art. As in other Egyptian temples, much of the food was probably redistributed among priests, staff, officials, and dependents after ritual use. The exact procedures at Akhetaten remain incompletely documented, but the temple economy almost certainly fed a large body of people. Sacred consumption and practical distribution were not opposites. The offering became valuable precisely because it moved through ritual and then back into human networks. Round the temple precincts, scribes record quantities and obligations. Writing is everywhere in the machinery of the city, even when most residents cannot read it. Labels mark jars, seal impressions secure containers, administrative notes track grain, wine, labour, and deliveries. Small objects carry the names of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and Aten. Signet rings bearing royal names may function as markers of status, administrative tools, rewards, or portable declarations of loyalty. The revolution is not confined to monumental stone. It travels on the hands of officials and in the seals pressed into wet clay. The central city fills with people whose lives depend upon proximity to the palace. High officials maintain large houses with broad reception halls and private quarters. Their compounds include granaries, kitchens, workshops, gardens, servant spaces, and storage rooms. Visitors entering such a residence would move through an architecture designed to display rank. Columns, painted plaster, carved doorways, and controlled views announce the owner's place within the new order. Yet the owner's security depends upon royal favour. Tomb scenes repeatedly show officials receiving gold from Akhenaten and Nefertiti at the window of appearance. These images may commemorate actual rewards, idealise ceremonies, or both. In either case, they reveal how status is imagined. Success comes from being seen by the king. Loyalty is public. Wealth descends from the palace beneath the rays of Aten. Beyond the great houses, smaller dwellings crowd the lanes. Some are well built and carefully arranged. Others are irregular, divided, expanded, or pressed into leftover ground. Families cook, sleep, store goods, repair equipment, and conduct household rituals within limited space. Industrial activity often occurs beside domestic life. Glass, faience, stone, metal, bone, and pigments are worked in areas that are neither fully residential nor fully industrial by modern standards. Recent archaeological study of suburban workshops has made this mixed urban world increasingly visible. Craftspeople produce jewellery, beads, inlays, tools, vessels, and decorative materials for both elite and ordinary use. Glassworking at Amarna is especially significant. The city contains evidence for the processing and colouring of glass, a luxury material associated with royal and international exchange. Scholars still debate the exact organisation of production and how centrally the palace controlled each workshop. But the remains show that technical knowledge flourished beyond the temple courts. Bone and animal products are also transformed into useful objects. Awls, handles, ornaments, and other items emerge from materials left after food consumption or animal processing. Nothing in the city is purely symbolic. Even the radiant court depends upon people who understand heat, pressure, colour, cutting edges, animal anatomy, and the stubborn behaviour of raw materials. The population is diverse in occupation and probably in origin. Some residents arrive from Thebes or Memphis. Others may come from provincial towns, military communities, foreign regions, or estates tied to the crown. The Amarna letters reveal an international court communicating in Akkadian cuneiform, the diplomatic language of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Clay tablets are prepared, written, stored, and carried through the city by trained specialists whose education connects Akhetaten to scribal traditions far beyond Egypt. Foreign languages, clothing, goods, and visitors would not have been unusual near the palace. Envoys bring gifts, messengers wait for responses, soldiers and guards protect royal spaces, chariot teams move along the broad roads. The capital built for Aten is also an imperial administrative centre, even if its founder prefers to describe it as a sacred horizon. Daily religion outside the official temples is more difficult to recover. Akhenaten's monuments imply a world in which Aten's rays reach the royal family, and the population receives life through loyalty to them. Ordinary households may possess images or objects connected with the king, queen, and Aten. Small shrines within elite houses sometimes focus on royal imagery. Prayers in officials' tombs praise Akhenaten as the source of advancement and survival. But archaeology also reveals that older religious habits do not disappear. Amulets and images connected with traditional protective deities continue to exist in the city. Figures associated with Bes, Taweret, and other familiar powers appear in domestic contexts. These gods belong to childbirth, household protection, health, sleep, music, and the dangers of everyday life. Their survival suggests that official reform did not fully penetrate private fear and hope. A family facing illness or uncertainty may have found little contradiction in honouring Aten publicly while keeping an older protective object nearby. No royal inscription admits such compromise. Official ideology rarely records quiet disobedience or practical religious blending. Yet what survives in the houses suggests that belief below the palace was more flexible than doctrine above it. This does not necessarily mean open resistance. Most residents probably adapted. They used the language required by the state, attended ceremonies, accepted rations, sought employment, and honoured the king whose city supplied their livelihood. Human beings can live within official systems without embracing every idea those systems proclaim. The same complexity appears in burial customs. Elite tombs emphasize the royal family and Aten, but the dead are still provided with goods, names, images, and expectations of continued existence. Shabti figures associated with Akhenaten survive, though their inscriptions differ from traditional examples. The old concern with preserving the body and identity remains difficult to remove. Even a religious revolution must answer the ancient Egyptian fear that death could sever a person from memory. As evening approaches, Akhetaten changes character. The sun that dominates official theology sinks toward the western horizon. Shadows lengthen across open temple courts. Work slows in some districts while kitchens become active again. The Ateten's absence during night creates a theological problem that the official art handles less fully than the sun's triumphant daylight. Earlier Egyptian religion had elaborate accounts of the solar god's passage through darkness. Akhenaten's system gives far less attention to that hidden journey. For ordinary residents, darkness remains practical and immediate. Lamps are lit, doors are closed, animals settle. Families gather in rooms that royal scenes never show. Protective habits, inherited prayers, and household objects regain their quiet importance. The city belongs to Aten in inscriptions, but in lived experience it belongs equally to bakers, scribes, porters, craft workers, servants, priests, officials, gardeners, guards, and countless people whose names have vanished. Their labour turns the king's revelation into walls, meals, ceremonies, and wealth. Above them, the royal family appears serene beneath hands of light. Around them, Akhetaten remains human-crowded, unequal, inventive, dusty, and only partially obedient to the theology for which it was built. The walls of Akhetaten do not show the royal family as Egypt has shown kings before. Akhenaten appears with an elongated skull, narrow eyes, heavy lips, a projecting chin, a long neck, sloping shoulders, a swollen abdomen, broad hips, and thin limbs. Nefertiti and the royal daughters share some of the same stretched proportions. Their faces can seem both elegant and unsettling, recognizable as human yet pushed beyond ordinary anatomy. In some colossal statues, the king's body appears almost androgynous, combining a narrow chest with wide hips and a soft, rounded belly. To modernize, the images seem to demand a diagnosis. That demand has produced more certainty than the evidence deserves. For generations, writers have attempted to read Akhenaten's body as a medical document. Proposed explanations have included endocrine disorders, hereditary syndromes, unusual patterns of fat distribution, and conditions affecting the skull or skeleton. Some theories have become especially popular because they appear to explain several visual features at once. Yet a carved relief is not a clinical photograph, and an artistic program repeated across royal figures is not automatically a record of disease. The same elongated faces and bodies appear not only on Akhenaten, but on Nefertiti. Their daughters, courtiers, servants, and sometimes even foreign figures. The proportions vary according to date, workshop, scale, and purpose. Early works can be extremely exaggerated, while later images often become more restrained. This broad distribution suggests that the Amarna style is primarily ideological and artistic, even if the king's actual appearance may have influenced some details. No single explanation fully accounts for every feature. Egyptian royal art had never been simple portraiture. A pharaoh's image was designed to embody kingship, youth, strength, divine order, and ritual effectiveness. Earlier rulers could be shown with idealized muscular bodies long after youth had passed. Facial features might preserve some individual character, but the body was shaped by convention. Akhenaten does not abandon symbolic representation. He replaces one symbolic body with another. The old royal form emphasizes stability, broad shoulders, a narrow waist, powerful legs, and a calm expression present the king as eternally capable of maintaining Ma'at. Akhenaten's form communicates something less familiar. His body is stretched, softened, and made visually distinct from ordinary masculinity. The effect may reflect a theology in which the king contains complementary creative qualities, standing beneath a god who produces all life without a conventional divine partner. Aten is not represented as a male or female body. Its light causes plants, animals, and humans to flourish. Akhenaten, as Aten's unique earthly intermediary, may therefore be shown in a form that resists ordinary categories. This interpretation remains debated. Egyptian artists did not leave an explanatory manual stating why the king's hips were widened or his face lengthened. The evidence remains incomplete, and meaning may have changed over the course of the reign. The features may combine theology, dynastic resemblance, workshop experimentation, and deliberate rejection of older royal ideals. What is certain is that the new style emerges alongside the new religion. At Karnak, early colossal statues already display extreme proportions. Their scale magnifies every departure from convention. The king's long face rises above a narrow torso and rounded stomach, while the heavy ceremonial regalia of pharaoh remains firmly in place. These are not images of a ruler surrendering authority. They are monumental declarations that authority has acquired a new physical language. The change extends beyond anatomy. Carvers begin treating movement, space, and family life differently. Akhenaten bends forward while making offerings. Nefertiti leans toward him. The royal daughters sit on laps, touch their parents, or turn their heads in lively poses. Their skulls are elongated, their limbs thin and flexible, their bodies less rigidly arranged than those of earlier royal children. In one famous domestic scene, the king and queen sit facing one another while their daughters interact between them beneath the descending rays of Aten. One child reaches upward, another rests against Nefertiti. Aten's hands extend life toward the royal couple. The scene feels private, but it is not ordinary family photography translated into stone. It appears on an altar or small stela intended for devotion. The intimacy has sacred purpose. The royal family is not shown relaxing because artists have suddenly gained access to unguarded palace moments. Their affection demonstrates fertility, continuity, and the life-giving force of Aten. The family becomes a living theological image. This is one reason Amarna art can appear more naturalistic while remaining highly controlled. Artists represent soft bodies, creased necks, bending backs, affectionate gestures, and irregular movement. They also repeat a narrow range of royal compositions with ideological consistency. The apparent realism is selective. It serves the new order. Akhenaten's face itself changes from image to image. Some representations are severe and almost mask-like. Others are delicate, with narrow cheeks and a faintly remote expression. The famous sculptural workshop associated with the artist Thutmose preserves studies, unfinished heads, plaster casts, and models that expose part of the production process. There, archaeologists found the painted bust of Nefertiti that later became one of the best-known images from the ancient world. Its symmetrical beauty can make the Amarna period appear refined and serene, but the same workshop contained less polished studies and faces marked by age, asymmetry, and individual variation. These objects suggest that artists observed closely, tested forms, and maintained reference models for repeated use. Royal image-making was organized work. A sculptor could study a face with remarkable sensitivity while still adjusting it to the demands of ideology. One lesser-known feature of Amarna artistic production is the use of plaster to modify carved surfaces. Artists could reshape details, correct proportions, or complete parts of a relief with applied material. Paint then unified stone and plaster into a finished image. What now appears as damaged bare carving may once have been softer, more colourful, and more complex. The surviving fragments are only the skeletal remains of a visual world originally filled with blue crowns, red-brown skin, pale garments, gold jewellery, green plants, bright birds, and the yellow radiance of the sun disk. Colour carried meaning. Male figures in Egyptian art were often painted darker than female figures, following long-established conventions. But Amarna artists could alter or soften such distinctions within the royal family. The rays of Aten bind the composition together. Their straight lines descend from the disk and end in hands, creating a visual structure unlike the curving bodies below. The god is geometric and remote. The family is physical and animated. The style spreads beyond palaces and temples. Officials in their tombs adopt elongated heads, narrow limbs, and bending postures. Servants, soldiers, foreign delegations, and offering bearers inhabit a world transformed by the same visual grammar. Yet social hierarchy remains strict. The royal family occupies the largest scale and central position. Officials may receive rewards, but they do so beneath palace windows. Foreigners may be carefully observed, but they appear as tribute bearers or subjects of Egyptian power. Artistic innovation does not produce social equality, nor does it remove older symbols of domination. Akhenaten can still appear smiting enemies, and Nefertiti may adopt related royal poses. Bound captives remain beneath royal feet, or decorate palace floors. The intimate father embracing a daughter, and the universal king trampling hostile lands belong to the same ideological system. Amarna art may look tender, but it is not politically gentle. The city's images also reveal an almost obsessive attention to the royal household. Earlier Egyptian monuments certainly depicted queens and royal children, yet Akhenaten's daughters appear with unusual frequency. Their names and number help scholars trace changing phases of the reign, though damaged inscriptions and reused blocks complicate the sequence. At least 6 daughters are known, and their appearances become part of the visual chronology of the court. Their elongated skulls have inspired claims of deliberate head-shaping, but no reliable evidence demonstrates that the royal family practiced artificial cranial modification. The shape is more securely understood as part of the Amarna artistic style. Again, the image tempts the viewer to turn symbolism into anatomy. The most cautious conclusion is also the most revealing. Akhenaten's body cannot be separated from the world he is trying to create. His image becomes a theological instrument. It rejects the old muscular certainty of kingship and replaces it with something fluid, unfamiliar, and immediately identifiable. The royal family appears as a distinct human category, touched by Aten in ways no one else can claim. For the inhabitants of Akhetaten, these faces are everywhere. They appear on temple walls, palace reliefs, household shrines, rings, seals, painted surfaces, and tombs. The population does not merely hear that the king mediates divine life. It sees his unusual body repeated until strangeness becomes authority. And beside that body stands Nefertiti, not hidden behind the pharaoh but enlarged by the same rays, performing many of the same rites and occupying a position no explanation of Akhenaten's revolution can safely treat as secondary. Nefertiti does not stand behind Akhenaten's revolution. she stands inside it. From the earliest years of the new religious program, the great royal wife appears with a frequency and authority that exceed the conventional role of a queen. She offers directly to the Aten, participates in major ceremonies, distributes royal favour, accompanies the king in the sacred family group, and sometimes occupies visual space almost equal to his own. Her image is not an ornamental addition to Akhenaten's theology. Without her, its central symbol, the royal household receiving life from the sun, would be incomplete. Her origins remain uncertain. No surviving inscription securely identifies her parents. The courtier A is often proposed as her father because his wife, Te, held the title of nurse of the great royal wife. But this relationship does not prove direct parentage. Nefertiti's name, usually translated as the beautiful one has come, once encouraged speculation that she was a foreign princess, perhaps from Mitanni. That theory has never gained firm support. Her titles, language, and rapid integration into Egyptian royal ideology point more convincingly toward a woman already closely connected to the court. Whatever her beginnings, she rises quickly. At Karnak, before the move to Akhetaten, Nefertiti already appears in prominent ritual scenes. In some reliefs, she makes offerings without Akhenaten immediately beside her. In others, she's shown in poses traditionally associated with pharaoh, including the symbolic defeat of Egypt's enemies. Such imagery does not necessarily mean that she formally rules as king at this stage, but it grants her a kind of royal agency rarely displayed so forcefully by earlier queens. The new religion requires both king and queen. Aten's rays descend toward them together. The Ankh is presented to their faces. Their daughters cluster around them, embodying fertility and continuation. Akhenaten is the primary knower of Aten, yet Nefertiti serves as the female principle through which royal life becomes visible, reproductive, and complete. This pairing draws upon older Egyptian ideas. Kingship had long depended upon complementary male and female forces. Goddesses could protect the king, embody the throne, renew creation, and serve as divine mothers or consorts. Queens participated in temple rites and dynastic legitimacy. Akhenaten's system intensifies these traditions rather than inventing royal femininity from nothing. Nefertiti becomes the central woman in a theology that reduces the visible cast of gods while magnifying the sacred family. Her titles reflect this expanding importance. She is the great royal wife, beloved of the king, lady of the two lands, and mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt. Formal epithets praise her beauty, voice, grace, and relationship to Aten. In tomb scenes, officials celebrate not only Akhenaten, but Nefertiti as a source of favour. Her presence at the window of appearance turns reward into a joint royal act. Gold descends from king and queen together. The famous painted bust found in the workshop of the sculptor Thutmose has shaped modern perceptions of her more than any ancient text. Its long neck, balanced features, high blue crown, and unfinished left eye create an image of remote perfection. Yet the bust is only one surviving study from a working environment filled with models, casts, unfinished heads, and traces of artistic experimentation. It may have served as a workshop reference rather than a finished object intended for public worship. Its beauty can also conceal the harder political reality of Nefertiti's position. She is not simply the elegant wife of an eccentric king. She participates in a program that redirects temple wealth, changes official language, attacks divine names, and binds religious authority more tightly to the throne. The same queen who appears tenderly with her daughters can also be shown exercising domination over enemies. Intimacy and power are never separate in Amarna imagery. Her relationship with Akhenaten is unusually visible but ultimately unknowable. The royal couple appears touching, riding together, worshipping together, and mourning within family scenes. These images may reflect genuine closeness, but they are also ideological compositions. Royal art shows what the monarchy wishes to communicate, not unguarded emotion. What survives in the record suggests partnership, yet the private nature of that partnership remains beyond recovery. Nefertiti also performs roles once distributed among several goddesses. With the decline of traditional divine imagery in official contexts, aspects of motherhood, fertility, protection, beauty, and royal renewal gather around the queen. She is not formally declared a goddess in the same way that Aten is divine, but her placement within the sacred triad of Aten, king, and queen gives her exceptional theological weight. In some contexts, she appears associated with Tefnut, Hathor, or other feminine principles familiar from older religion, even as official Atenism restricts the public role of those deities. The revolution may suppress names, but it cannot eliminate the structural needs those gods once fulfilled. Nefertiti helps absorb them. Her 6 known daughters appear repeatedly: Meritaten, Meketaten, Ankhesenpeten, Neferneferuaten Tasherit, Neferneferua, and Setepenre. Their births and changing appearances help scholars estimate the sequence of monuments, but the family record becomes increasingly difficult in the later reign. Some daughters disappear from inscriptions, others gain new titles. Meritaten rises in prominence and may assume important ceremonial duties. The evidence remains fragmented, and later damage makes the final years especially uncertain. Nefertiti herself becomes less clearly visible under her familiar name. For a long time, this apparent disappearance was interpreted as evidence that she died or fell from favour around the middle of Akhenaten's reign. That older reconstruction is now treated cautiously. Inscriptions discovered or reassessed over time indicate that Nefertiti was still active relatively late, possibly into Akhenaten's 16th regnal year. Her absence from some contexts may reflect changing titles rather than death. This leads into one of the most difficult problems of the Amarna succession. Near the end of Akhenaten's reign, a royal figure named Neferneferuaten appears with pharaonic titles. Some inscriptions use feminine grammatical forms, strongly suggesting that this ruler was a woman. The name Neferneferuaten had already belonged to Nefertiti as part of her expanded royal name, Neferneferuaten Nefertiti. This has led many scholars to identify the later pharaoh Neferneferuaten with Nefertiti. Under this interpretation, Nefertiti may first have become co-regent with Akhenaten and then ruled briefly after his death. Her throne name may have been Ankheperur, though the surviving inscriptions are damaged and sometimes altered. Epithets linking the ruler to Akhenaten, including expressions of being affective for or beloved of him, can support the identification, but the case is not closed. Another woman, Meritaten, has also been proposed, as has a separate royal individual whose identity has been lost. Earlier scholarship sometimes merged Neferneferuaten with Shmenkhkara, a short-lived ruler associated with the final Amarna years, but differences in names, grammar, and titulary now encourage many researchers to treat them as distinct. Even then, the order and duration of their reigns remain debated. The problem is made worse by deliberate erasure, reused objects, altered cartouches, and burial equipment reassigned to later rulers. The Amarna court collapses into a confusing sequence of names, precisely where historians most need clarity. No single explanation fully accounts for every inscription. If Nefertiti did become pharaoh, The transformation would not have been as abrupt as it might seem. She had spent years offering to Aten, appearing at near royal scale, performing rites, rewarding officials, and embodying the female half of sacred kingship. Her elevation could have been presented as continuity rather than revolution. The theology had already prepared the population to see her as more than a queen. Yet formal kingship would still require changes. Egyptian royal titulary, costume, ritual, and grammar were deeply shaped by masculine convention. Though women such as Hatshepsut had ruled before, a female pharaoh could adapt these forms without abandoning her identity entirely. The possible feminine language attached to Nefertiti suggests precisely such an adaptation. Nefertiti's final fate remains unknown. No tomb securely identified as hers has yielded her burial. No mummy can be confidently assigned to her. Her famous image survives, but her body and last years disappear into the same damaged transition that consumes the rest of Akhenaten's dynasty. What remains certain is her centrality. Atenism was not simply the religion of one solitary pharaoh staring toward the sun. It was staged through a royal family, and at the heart of that family stood a queen who could act, offer, reward, dominate, and perhaps rule. While her image grows brighter beneath Aten's rays, the rest of Egypt is entering a darker phase of the experiment. The elevation of the royal household is no longer enough. For Akhenaten's vision to become exclusive, the old gods must lose not only their wealth and visibility, but the very names by which they remain alive. The attack on the old gods does not begin with a single proclamation preserved in perfect stone. It emerges through scars. Across temples and monuments, the name of Amun is cut away. In some places, only the divine name disappears while the surrounding inscription remains intact. In others, images associated with Amun are damaged or removed. The campaign reaches into royal names containing Amun, forcing workmen to chisel at the titulary of earlier kings. Even references to the plural gods can become targets, as if the language of divine multiplicity has itself become unacceptable. The result is not total silence, but a landscape of interruption. A figure stands without a name, a cartouche has been hollowed out, a prayer continues until the line reaches a divine title, then collapses into damage. The missing signs reveal where official tolerance ended. Amun receives the strongest attention because Amun is more than one god among many. By Akhenaten's time, the cult of Amun occupies the center of Theban religious power. Karnak controls immense resources, employs large numbers of people, and carries the prestige of generations of royal patronage. Amun's priests participate in festivals, oracles, administration, and the public renewal of kingship. To weaken Amun is therefore to alter theology, economy, and authority at the same time. Yet the campaign is not safely reduced to a financial seizure disguised as religion. Akhenaten's program is too sustained, too symbolic, and too personally tied to his public identity to be explained only as an attack on temple wealth. He changes his name, moves the capital, reshapes art, rewrites divine titulary, reorganizes ritual space, and transforms the royal family into the central image of worship. These actions suggest conviction as well as strategy. The difficulty is that conviction and control are not opposites. Akhenaten may believe that Aten is the true visible source of life, and that traditional gods fragment or conceal that truth. He may also recognize that a system centered on Aten places sacred knowledge more firmly in royal hands. The evidence does not allow historians to enter his private mind and separate faith from advantage. What survives in the record suggests that the two reinforced one another. The destruction itself appears selective and uneven. Amun is attacked widely, and the names or images of associated deities such as Mut may also suffer. Other gods receive different treatment depending on place and date. Some divine forms disappear from official monuments, while household objects connected with older protective traditions remain in use. Local practice does not always mirror royal policy. Egypt is too large, too socially layered, and too deeply attached to inherited rituals for a single court to erase everything with equal efficiency. This unevenness matters because the popular image of Akhenaten ordering the immediate destruction of every god in Egypt is not supported by the archaeology. There is no evidence that every sanctuary closes at once. No complete administrative archive survives listing all suppressed cults. Some temples may have lost resources or personnel. Some rituals may have continued quietly. Some provincial communities may have complied only in visible official contexts. Others may have adapted traditional beliefs to the language of Aten. The campaign is real, but its practical reach remains incomplete. The strongest evidence appears where the state has the most control: royal monuments, major temples, court-sponsored tombs, official objects, and inscriptions connected with administration. Here, the narrowing of divine language is difficult to miss. Aten's name is written in cartouches. The royal family dominates scenes of worship. Traditional gods recede. Officials describe loyalty to the king rather than direct relationships with a broad divine world. This concentration changes the structure of religious access. In earlier temple ideology, the king is already the formal intermediary between gods and Egypt, even when priests perform rituals on his behalf. Akhenaten does not invent royal mediation, he intensifies it. Aten shines on all lands, but the gods' rays terminate most intimately upon the king and queen. Akhenaten alone is presented as fully knowing Aten. Officials receive reward through royal favour. The population approaches cosmic order through loyalty to the palace. The result may be described not only as monotheism, but as monopoly. This distinction helps explain why Akhenaten's reform differs from later religious systems that emphasize an individual believer's direct relationship with one god. Atenism does not dissolve hierarchy. It makes hierarchy sacred. The king is not merely the chief worshipper. He becomes the indispensable channel through which Aten is known. The attack on names reinforces that monopoly. In Egyptian thought, a name is a component of existence. To remove a god's name from stone is to interfere with memory, presence, and ritual renewal. The act is not simply censorship in the modern administrative sense. It is an attempt to reduce the effectiveness of the divine identity being erased. The campaign also creates practical dilemmas for scribes and craftsmen. Amun's name appears in personal names, royal names, institutional titles, prayers, temple inventories, and older inscriptions. Removing it consistently would require enormous labour. The surviving damage suggests organised action, but also reveals limits. Some names are missed, others are only partially removed. In certain cases, later restorers recarve what Akhenaten's agents destroyed. A lesser-known consequence is that the campaign turns ordinary language into dangerous territory. If the plural word gods is avoided or altered, scribes must reshape formulas that had been stable for centuries. Religious vocabulary narrows. Established expressions become politically charged. The revolution does not only change which deity receives offerings, it changes what can safely be written. The dead are drawn into the conflict as well. Tombs are built to preserve names, images, offerings, and relationships for eternity. When divine names are removed from funerary texts or monuments, The dead may lose parts of the sacred network intended to sustain them, yet traditional expectations do not vanish. Burials still involve bodies, goods, names, and hopes of continued existence. Shabti figures associated with Akhenaten survive, though their inscriptions differ from conventional examples. Older funerary habits remain beneath the official rejection of much traditional theology. This contradiction is not accidental noise, it reveals the limits of revolution. Akhenaten can command monumental language, but he cannot easily eliminate centuries of concern about death, memory, protection, and regeneration. Aten's daylight theology is powerful when describing creation, growth, and visible life. It is less detailed about the hidden world after sunset and the dangerous passage beyond death. Traditional Egyptian religion had supplied elaborate answers through Osiris, the solar night journey, protective deities, spells, and ritual knowledge. Atenism reduces many of these voices without clearly replacing every function they served. For ordinary people, the problem would have been practical rather than philosophical. Which prayers remain acceptable? Which amulets can still be worn? Which god protects a household in the dark? Which rituals ensure the dead are remembered? Official art offers the king beneath the sun, but households still face illness, uncertainty, childbirth, grief, and night. Archaeology suggests that many people answered by continuing familiar practices where possible. Protective figures survive in domestic settings. Traditional names remain in use. Small-scale belief proves harder to police than temple walls. A family could live in Akhetaten, work for the state, honour the royal family publicly, and still keep an older protective object in a private room. Such behaviour may not have felt rebellious, it may simply have felt sensible. There is also no clear evidence for a vast machinery of personal persecution aimed at individuals for private belief. Akhenaten's regime is coercive in its control of official space and destructive in its treatment of divine names, but the surviving record does not reveal tribunals searching homes for forbidden gods. The pressure appears institutional, monumental, economic, and ideological. That is already enough to transform the country. The later restoration texts describe the Amarna period as a time when temples had fallen into neglect and the gods had turned away. These accounts are valuable, but they are also political documents written by those rebuilding the old order. They exaggerate rupture to glorify restoration. Just as Akhenaten presents his own city as a perfect sacred beginning, his successors present their return to tradition as the rescue of a damaged world. Between those competing claims lies a more complicated reality. Some temples suffer, some names are erased, some officials prosper under the new system, some older practices continue. Aten dominates the state without fully conquering the household. Akhenaten's revolution reaches deep enough to leave scars across Egypt, yet not deep enough to prevent the old gods from returning. For the moment, however, the king appears to have won. Amun's name is missing. Aten's rays fill the walls. Akhetaten stands as the centre of sacred life. The royal family receives offerings, loyalty, and light. Beyond the city, the empire continues sending letters, and those letters reveal that while Akhenaten attempts to reorder heaven, the political world around Egypt is becoming increasingly difficult to control. The letters arrive covered in dust. They come from kings who call Akhenaten their brother, from governors who call themselves his servants, and from local rulers who describe themselves as the dirt beneath the pharaoh's feet. They cross deserts, mountains, ports, and military roads before reaching the royal archive at Akhetaten. Their language is usually Akkadian. the diplomatic language of the late Bronze Age, written in wedge-shaped signs pressed into damp clay. Some tablets are carefully formed, others are awkward, produced by scribes working far from the great centres of Mesopotamian learning. Together, they reveal a world that refuses to pause for Akhenaten's revolution. While names are being cut from temples in Egypt, alliances are shifting in Syria, while offerings rise beneath the Aten, rival kings negotiate marriages and gold shipments. While the royal family appears beneath peaceful rays, governors in Canaan accuse one another of treachery, beg for troops, and warn that cities may be lost. These tablets are known as the Amarna letters because many were discovered among the ruins of Akhetaten. Their survival is partly accidental. They were administrative documents, not sacred texts designed for eternity. When the city was abandoned, parts of the diplomatic archive were left behind. Some tablets broke, others were scattered or removed in modern times. What remains is substantial but incomplete, a damaged window into Egypt's international relations during the reigns of Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, and possibly the rulers who followed immediately after him. The archive contains correspondence between Egypt and the other great powers of the age Babylonia, Mitanni, Assyria, Hatti, and Alashie, usually identified with Cyprus. These rulers address one another as members of an exclusive family of kings. They exchange gifts, royal women, assurances of friendship, demands for reciprocity, and complaints about inadequate generosity. Gold appears constantly. Foreign kings know that Egypt possesses access to Nubian gold on a scale that makes it exceptionally wealthy. They ask for it with a persistence only slightly disguised by diplomatic courtesy. One king complains that the gold sent to him was not as valuable as expected. Another requests enough to decorate a major building. Gifts are described as expressions of brotherhood, but everyone keeps count. The letters expose the practical calculations beneath ceremonial friendship. A ruler who sends horses, lapis lazuli, chariots, fine vessels, or royal brides expect something comparable in return. Delay can be interpreted as disrespect. An object that appears magnificent in court art becomes, in correspondence, a subject of argument over quality, weight, and delivery. Marriage creates even sharper tension. Foreign princesses are sent to Egypt as part of diplomatic alliances, but Egyptian royal daughters are not normally sent abroad. When a foreign king asks for one, the request is rejected or evaded. The imbalance reflects Egypt's view of its own status. The pharaoh can receive royal women from other courts without treating those courts as fully equal in dynastic terms. Akhenaten inherits this system from his father. Amenhotep III had cultivated international relationships through marriages, gifts, and correspondence. Queen Tia was known to foreign rulers and remained important enough for a king of Mitanni to write to her after Amenhotep III's death, asking her to confirm earlier promises. Her continued presence illustrates how diplomacy depended upon memory inside the royal household. Agreements were not merely abstract relations between states. They were personal arrangements among rulers, queens, envoys, and trusted officials. The transition to Akhenaten appears to have caused uncertainty. Foreign courts need reassurance that old commitments will be honoured. Gifts promised by the previous king are still expected. Messengers complain about long delays or poor treatment. The new pharaoh may be preoccupied with transforming Egypt's sacred order, but international diplomacy continues to demand attention, calculation, and expensive displays. The most troubling letters come not from the great kings but from Egypt's dependent rulers in the Levant. Egypt controls its northern territories through a network of local governors and vassal princes rather than by placing a massive permanent army in every city. These rulers send tribute, host Egyptian representatives, provide labor or military support, and appeal to the pharaoh when threatened. Their letters are filled with formal submission. A writer may declare himself the king's servant 7 times and 7 times, falling at the pharaoh's feet on his back and stomach. The ritual humility is extreme. The political reality is not. Local rulers feud, expand territory, betray alliances, and accuse one another of rebellion. They know how to use the language of loyalty while pursuing their own interests. A city under pressure asks for archers. A governor claims his neighbor has joined the enemy. Another insists that accusations against him are lies. Each hopes Egyptian intervention will strengthen his position. Among the most famous correspondents is Ribhadda of Byblos, whose long series of letters describes a steadily worsening crisis along the Levantine coast. He complains of enemies, internal betrayal, shortages, and the loss of surrounding territories, again and again. He asks Egypt to send military assistance. His tone grows increasingly desperate as his position weakens. These letters have helped create the enduring image of Akhenaten as a king who ignored the empire while absorbed in religious obsession. The image is powerful, but it is not entirely secure. Ribhadda is not a neutral observer writing a balanced history. He's a local ruler trying to persuade the pharaoh to commit resources on his behalf. Exaggeration serves his survival. His enemies write letters of their own, presenting different accounts. The archive preserves complaints more readily than successful routine administration because people in difficulty have strong reasons to write repeatedly. A request for troops does not prove that none were sent. Missing tablets may once have recorded responses or actions. Egyptian forces could intervene without leaving a surviving written explanation at Akhetaten. The evidence remains incomplete, and silence in the archive cannot automatically be treated as proof of royal indifference. At the same time, the letters should not be dismissed as mere theatrical pleading. Egypt's influence in parts of Syria and Canaan was under real pressure. The Hittite kingdom expanded under Suppiluliuma I, weakening Mitanni and altering the balance of power in northern Syria. Local rulers took advantage of instability. The group called the Habaru appears repeatedly in the correspondence, though the term does not describe a single ethnic nation and should not be simply equated with the later Hebrews. It seems to refer more broadly to displaced, dependent, outlawed, or militarized groups operating beyond ordinary political structures. Some governors accuse rivals of joining the Habiru. Others may employ such groups themselves. The term becomes another weapon in diplomatic argument. To label an opponent Habiru is to suggest disorder, illegitimacy, and rebellion against the pharaoh. Egypt does respond in some cases. Commissioners travel through the provinces. Garrisons remain in strategic locations. Troops and chariots are referenced. Tribute continues to move. Foreign delegations still reach the royal court. The machinery of empire has not stopped simply because the capital has moved. The question is whether it is working well enough. Akhenaten may have accepted losses in distant or unstable regions rather than committing major forces. He may have misunderstood the speed of Hittite expansion. He may have relied too heavily on local rulers whose reports contradicted one another. He may also have been following a cautious policy shaped by costs that the surviving letters do not reveal. No single explanation fully accounts for the pattern. His religious priorities probably mattered, but they did not seal Egypt inside Akhetaten. The discovery of the diplomatic archive in the city proves the opposite. Scribes there remain engaged with an international system extending from the Aegean and Anatolia to Mesopotamia and the Levant. Clay analysis and studies of tablet manufacture suggest varied origins and complex scribal practices. The city of the Aten is also a multilingual administrative centre, where foreign political realities are translated into compact blocks of clay. This creates a striking contrast. In official art, foreign peoples appear in ordered processions bearing tribute toward Akhenaten. Their clothing, skin tones, hairstyles, and goods distinguish them, but all move within an Egyptian vision of hierarchy. The king sits at the centre while the world acknowledges his supremacy. In the letters, the same world is impatient, argumentative, and unstable. Great kings complain that gifts are too small. Vassals manipulate information. Messengers are detained. Cities change allegiance. Egypt's control must be negotiated every day. Akhenaten's mistake may not have been abandoning the empire completely. It may have been believing that an inherited system could continue functioning while his court invested extraordinary energy in remaking the sacred centre of the state. The empire did not vanish during his reign, but its northern position became more fragile, and his successors inherited a political landscape requiring renewed military attention. The tablets therefore resist both extremes. They do not prove that Akhenaten sat beneath the sun while every province collapsed unheard, nor do they show a perfectly managed empire unaffected by his revolution. They reveal a government still operating, still corresponding, still receiving tribute, but facing threats it could not fully contain. At Akhetaten, scribes place the latest tablets among earlier messages. Outside, temple courtyards fill with offerings and royal ceremonies. Far to the north, another city waits for archers that may or may not arrive. The king has attempted to concentrate divine order around himself. Beyond Egypt's borders, political order is becoming harder to command, and within his radiant capital, the bodies of the people who built that order are beginning to reveal a different cost. The sunlight in Akhetaten falls most beautifully on painted walls. It illuminates blue lotus pools, bright collars, polished chariots, baskets of fruit, and offering tables loaded beyond practical limits. In tomb scenes, servants carry food in orderly processions. Officials receive gold. Foreign lands send tribute. The royal family breathes beneath Aten's rays, and every surface insists that creation is flourishing. The cemeteries tell a quieter story. Beyond the palaces and temples, east of the city on the desert margins, the people of Akhetaten bury their dead in ground far less elaborate than the decorated tombs of high officials. Excavations in these cemeteries have transformed understanding of the capital because they preserve evidence that royal inscriptions were never designed to show the physical cost of building and sustaining a city at extraordinary speed. Many bodies bear signs of strenuous labour. Bones record repeated stress, heavy loading, and demanding movement. Spines and joints show patterns consistent with carrying weight and performing hard physical work. Some injuries healed during life, suggesting that people continued working after significant trauma. Others reveal the ordinary hazards of construction, transport, workshop activity, and life in an unfinished urban environment. Akhetaten's monuments may have risen quickly, because human bodies absorbed the pressure of that speed. The workers are largely anonymous. Official scenes show idealized teams carrying stone, preparing offerings, or serving the court, but rarely preserve the personal histories of those who dug foundations, hauled water, moulded bricks, quarried limestone, or supplied the city's food. Archaeology cannot restore their voices, yet it can show that the radiant capital was built through sustained physical effort. This should not be turned into a simple story of a uniquely cruel city. Hard labour, injury, disease, and nutritional stress occurred throughout the ancient world, including in other Egyptian settlements. Skeletal evidence is also shaped by who was buried in a particular cemetery and whose remains survived well enough for study. The population of one burial ground may not represent every resident of Akhetaten. Even with those cautions, the pattern is difficult to ignore. Some individuals show evidence of poor nutrition or physiological stress experienced during life. Teeth and bones can preserve traces of periods when growth was disrupted by illness, inadequate diet, or both. Dental disease appears. Degenerative changes accumulate. These findings stand in sharp contrast to the official image of endless abundance beneath Aten. The contradiction is not necessarily evidence that the city was starving. Food remains, storage facilities, bakeries, animal bones, plant material, and administrative systems show that substantial resources entered Akhetaten. The question is how evenly they were distributed. Elite households possessed large granaries, spacious kitchens, gardens, and access to high-quality goods. Temple offerings displayed enormous quantities of food. Palace institutions controlled supplies on a scale unavailable to ordinary residents. Smaller households lived with fewer resources and greater vulnerability to interruption. A city can appear prosperous at the institutional level, while many of its inhabitants remain poorly nourished. The diet may also have been less varied than royal art suggests. Bread and beer supplied essential calories, but could not alone guarantee good health. Grinding grain introduced fine stone particles into flour, contributing to severe tooth wear. Repeated exposure to dusty environments and smoke from domestic fires could affect respiratory health, though such conditions are difficult to diagnose precisely from skeletal remains. Parasites and infectious disease were common risks wherever people, animals, water containers, and waste occupied dense spaces. Akhetaten grew too quickly to develop slowly tested systems of urban management. Wells were dug across the settlement, but water still had to be raised, stored, and carried. Animals lived close to houses and workshops. Refuse accumulated in abandoned plots and behind walls. Industrial processes produced ash, broken moulds, slag, pigments, bone waste, and sharp fragments. The city's wide ceremonial roads did not prevent narrow residential lanes from becoming crowded and dirty. The Aten gave life from the sky, but survival depended on the quality of water in a jar. Archaeological work in residential districts reveals constant improvisation. Buildings were expanded, subdivided, repaired, and reused. Workshops operated within or beside houses. Large estates attracted clusters of smaller dwellings, perhaps occupied by dependents, servants, labourers, or craft specialists. Social hierarchy was visible not only in jewellery and titles, but in access to space, shade, storage, and food. One official could stand beneath the window of appearance and receive gold, while many others lived in rooms scarcely represented in royal art. This inequality is not a hidden failure unique to Atenism. Egyptian society had long been hierarchical. What makes Akhetaten revealing is the compressed clarity of the evidence. The city was founded, occupied, and largely abandoned within a relatively short period. Its houses and cemeteries capture one royal experiment almost as a single archaeological layer. The debris of daily life remains close to the ideological monuments that claimed universal harmony. The city has also been connected to stories of epidemic disease. Several members of the royal family disappear from the record during the later reign. Diplomatic correspondence from the wider Near East contains references to illness. The sudden abandonment of Akhetaten after Akhenaten's death appears dramatic. Together, these clues once encouraged the idea that a devastating plague swept through the capital, killed large numbers of people, and helped destroy the Atenist state. It is a compelling story because it gives the revolution a clear biological ending. The city rises, disease enters, the royal family dies, and the old gods return. The evidence does not support that certainty. Recent bioarchaeological analysis has found no convincing sign of a mortality catastrophe, severe enough to demonstrate that a mass epidemic overwhelmed Akhetaten. Cemetery populations show disease and hardship, but those conditions are not the same as proof of a sudden citywide plague. The number and distribution of burials do not clearly reveal an extraordinary mortality crisis. Possible references to epidemics in texts from the broader region cannot automatically be transferred to this particular city. Some infectious diseases leave no clear marks on bone, especially when they kill quickly. The absence of skeletal evidence therefore cannot prove that no epidemic occurred, yet no single explanation fully accounts for the abandonment of Akhetaten, and disease should not be treated as a fact simply because it provides a dramatic conclusion. The deaths and disappearances within the royal family may have resulted from different causes over several years. Names vanish from monuments for political as well as biological reasons. Inscriptions are damaged, unfinished, altered, and reused. A princess absent from later scenes may have died, changed position, or simply ceased to appear in surviving material. The temptation to connect every disappearance to one plague exceeds what the record allows. Life at Akhetaten was difficult enough without inventing a single apocalyptic event. Residents faced heat, dust, hard labour, uneven diets, injury, and the uncertainty of dependence on a court whose favour created the city. Many had moved there because state institutions required their skills or because new opportunities followed royal construction. Craftspeople could find patronage. Officials could rise rapidly. Labourers could receive rations. The capital was not only a place of suffering, it was also a centre of employment, innovation, and social ambition. Glassworkers produced brilliant coloured material, faience specialists created beads and inlays, metal workers repaired and shaped valuable objects, scribes trained in foreign writing systems, gardeners maintained carefully ordered spaces in a hostile climate, builders experimented with rapid methods. The city's population did not merely endure Akhenaten's vision, it made that vision technically possible. Yet nearly all reward flowed through structures controlled by the crown. Akhenaten's theology proclaimed that Aten sustained every form of life, from foreign peoples to birds in their nests. In practice, the king controlled the institutions that distributed much of the city's food, employment, status, and sacred meaning. The universal God illuminated everyone, but the benefits of the sacred economy remained unequal. The bodies in the cemeteries expose the distance between cosmic language and human experience. Aten may raise every creature with his rays, but no hymn mentions damaged joints from carrying stone. Official reliefs show baskets overflowing with produce, not periods of nutritional stress. Royal scenes celebrate ordered creation, not the difficulty of hauling water through a desert capital. What survives in the record suggests neither a paradise nor a city collapsing from its first day. Akhetaten functioned. It produced, worshipped, administered, traded, and housed substantial population. Its difficulties were real but survivable as long as the court continued investing resources and authority there. That dependence was its greatest weakness. Older Egyptian cities were rooted in local economies, inherited temples, regional identities, and generations of accumulated life. Akhetaten existed because one ruler commanded it into being. Its temples served his god. Its elite depended upon his favour. Its ceremonial geography revolved around his family. Its population had been drawn into the desert by the machinery of his reign. As long as Akhenaten lived, the city's purpose remained clear. But the royal household was beginning to change. Familiar faces disappeared from the walls. Titles shifted. Daughters moved into roles once held by their mother. New royal names appeared without secure identities. The system built around one sacred family was approaching the moment when that family could no longer remain intact. The royal family that once seemed to embody perfect creation begins to fragment on the walls. For years, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their daughters appear beneath the Aten as a complete sacred household. Their bodies overlap in intimate gestures. Their names repeat across temples, palaces, boundary stelae, tombs, rings, and reliefs. The family is more than dynastic decoration. It is the visible structure of the new religion. Aten shines above. The king and queen receive life, and their daughters demonstrate renewal continuing from one generation to the next. That structure becomes increasingly unstable during the later years of the reign. Some royal daughters disappear from surviving inscriptions. Others gain greater prominence. Titles change. Images are modified. Names belonging to one person are recarved for another. New rulers emerge whose identities remain uncertain. The record does not provide a clear sequence of deaths and accessions. It provides fragments that often contradict one another. The uncertainty begins with the daughters themselves. 6 are securely named Meritaten, Akhetaten, Ankhesenpaten, Neferneferuaten Tasheret, Neferneferua, and Setepenre. Their order is usually understood through their appearances in dated monuments and family scenes, though incomplete preservation complicates even this basic chronology. The older daughters participate visibly in court ceremony. Meritaten, the eldest, becomes especially important and eventually assumes titles suggesting a leading position within the royal household. A scene in the royal tomb at Akhetaten appears to show the family mourning Akhetaten. The chamber contains images of intense grief, with Akhenaten and Nefertiti raising their hands near a ceremonial bed or platform. The scene has inspired many attempts to identify the cause and circumstances of her death, but the accompanying inscriptions are too damaged to support a confident reconstruction. Earlier interpretations sometimes claim she died during childbirth, partly because another small figure appears in the room. That explanation remains disputed. The figure may have a different identity or symbolic function, and the evidence is insufficient to establish what happened. What is clear is that a royal daughter disappears, and that her loss is incorporated into the decoration of the family tomb. Other daughters become difficult to trace. Neferneferua and Setepenre vanish from later records, but silence does not reveal cause. They may have died, their monuments may not survive, or their names may have been removed during later political changes. The same damaged evidence that encourages plague narratives also prevents them from being tested securely. The once crowded family portraits grow less stable. Nefertiti's position creates an even larger puzzle. Older histories often assumed that she disappeared around Akhenaten's 12th regnal year, perhaps because she died, was disgraced, or was replaced by another royal woman. More recent discoveries have weakened that tidy sequence. An inscription from a limestone quarry near Akhetaten appears to mention Nefertiti in Akhenaten's 16th year, showing that she probably remained alive and retained her title of Great Royal Wife very late in the reign. Her apparent disappearance may therefore be a transformation. A ruler called Nefertiti appears near the end of the Amarna period. This individual bears full royal titles and, in several inscriptions, is described using feminine grammatical forms. The throne name Ankheperur is associated with this ruler, often accompanied by epithets expressing a relationship with Akhenaten. Because Nefertiti's extended name included Neferuaten, many scholars identify the female pharaoh with her. Under this reconstruction, Nefertiti becomes co-regent during Akhenaten's final years, taking on formal kingship while continuing to support the Atenist order. She may then have ruled independently for a short period after his death. The possibility is persuasive, but not certain. Akhetaten has also been proposed as the female ruler, though the evidence linking her to the name Neferuaten is weaker. Some scholars suggest another royal woman whose identity is no longer recoverable. The problem is complicated by objects on which one royal name has been replaced by another, by funerary equipment later adapted for Tutankhamun, and by incomplete inscriptions preserving only portions of titles. Alongside Neferuaten stands another elusive king, Smenkhare. Smenkhare is attested as a pharaoh and appears to have been connected closely with Akhetaten, who is identified as his great royal wife in surviving material. His reign was probably very brief, whether he ruled alongside Akhenaten, immediately after him, before Neferuaten, or partly overlapping with her remains disputed. Earlier historians sometimes treated Smenkhare and Neferuaten as the same person, interpreting different names as stages in one ruler's career. The feminine grammatical forms attached to Neferuaten now make this increasingly difficult. Many scholars separate them into two rulers, perhaps one male and one female, but the exact order is still unresolved. The physical identities behind these names remain equally uncertain. Human remains from royal burials have been connected with various members of the Amarna family, but genetic, anatomical, and archaeological interpretations have not produced universal agreement. Mummies can be moved, coffins reused, names erased, and burial goods reassigned. A body without a secure inscription cannot simply be matched to whichever ruler is missing from the historical sequence. Akhenaten himself becomes strangely quiet near the end. His latest securely dated regnal year is usually taken to be year 17. There is no surviving account of his final illness, death, or funeral. He had ordered a royal tomb cut into the eastern valley at Akhetaten, and declared on the boundary stele that he wished to be buried within Aten's sacred territory. Fragments from that tomb indicate that it was intended for the king and members of his family. Whether Akhenaten's body remained there for long is unknown. The royal tomb was damaged in antiquity, its reliefs were attacked, equipment removed, and chambers disturbed. Later, members of the Amarna dynasty may have been transferred to the Valley of the Kings when the court abandoned Akhetaten. Several fragmentary objects found elsewhere have been linked to Akhenaten's burial, but no complete royal funeral assemblage survives to show how Atenist theology addressed the pharaoh's death. This absence is particularly striking because Akhenaten's religion is strongest in daylight. Atenism explains creation through sunrise, warmth, growth, breath, and visible activity. The hymns describe the world awakening when the Aten appears and falling silent when it sets. Yet Egyptian kingship requires a theology of death as well as life. The pharaoh must pass into eternity, preserve identity, join divine powers, and continue sustaining order. Traditional religion possessed centuries of funerary language for this purpose. Osiris offered regeneration, re-travelled through the night and rose again. Protective deities guarded the body and guided the dead through hidden regions. Akhenaten had suppressed or reduced many of these traditions in official contexts, but he could not avoid the problem they answered. The fragments of his burial suggest compromise rather than a completely new system. Royal coffins, shabti figures, protective imagery, and established funerary practices were adapted rather than eliminated. Atenist language could be placed upon objects whose forms belonged to older Egyptian traditions. The revolution reached the tomb, but it did not create an entirely new vocabulary of death. This may reveal a deeper weakness in Akhenaten's project. His theology could reorganize public worship around visible sunlight and royal presence, but the moment the king died, both sources of certainty disappeared. Aten still rose, but the one man said to know Aten fully was gone. The sacred family had lost daughters, changed queens, and accumulated rulers whose legitimacy was difficult to define. The political consequences must have been immediate. Officials who had built careers through loyalty to Akhenaten now had to decide which successor represented continuity. Temple personnel depended upon royal support. Military commanders and provincial administrators required clear authority. Foreign courts awaited answers to earlier promises. The city's population depended upon resources supplied because Akhetaten was the royal capital. A brief co-regency may have been intended to prevent disorder. Elevating Nefertiti or another royal woman could have preserved the religious system through someone already central to its imagery. Smenkar's marriage to Meritaten may similarly have reinforced dynastic legitimacy. Yet the rapid appearance of multiple royal identities suggests that no solution remained stable for long. The later Amarna years are not simply a sequence of family tragedies. They are a crisis in the architecture of power. Akhenaten had concentrated religious authority around one god, one king, one queen, and one city. That concentration made the system visually powerful but institutionally fragile. When the family changed, the entire sacred order changed with it. There was no ancient network of Aten temples deeply rooted across Egypt, no long-established priesthood independent of one reign, and no broadly distributed mythology capable of absorbing dynastic uncertainty. The royal family had been made into the bridge between humanity and Aten. Now the bridge was disappearing piece by piece. When Akhenaten dies, perhaps in his 17th year, the city does not immediately fall silent. Officials remain. Temples continue functioning for a time. Successors still use Atenist names and images. The experiment does not end in a single night. But the centre no longer holds with the same certainty. Beyond Akhetaten, the names Akhenaten tried to erase remain embedded in villages, memories, neglected sanctuaries, personal names, and rituals waiting to return to public life. The old gods have not vanished. They have been waiting for the royal family to vanish first. The old gods return first in language. A royal name changes. Ankhesenpaten becomes Amun. The young king who had first been called Tutankhaten becomes Tutankhamun. Aten is removed from the identities of the royal couple, and Amun returns to the place Akhenaten had tried to empty. The change is small enough to fit inside a cartouche, but it carries the weight of a national reversal. Tutankhamun comes to the throne while still very young, after the uncertain sequence of rulers that follows Akhenaten. His precise parentage and the order of succession remain debated, but he belongs to the Amarna royal family and initially inherits its religious language. Early in his reign, the court still bears traces of Akhetaten. Atenist names remain in use, and some objects later found in Tutankhamun's tomb appear to have been adapted from equipment prepared for other members of the dynasty. The restoration is therefore not an instantaneous rejection performed on the day of accession. It develops as the court moves away from Akhenaten's system and back toward the traditional religious centers of Egypt. The royal residence shifts. Memphis regains political importance. Thebes again becomes central to state ritual. Temples connected with Amun, Ptah, and other gods receive attention. Craftsmen begin repairing names that Akhenaten's agents had erased. Images return to damaged walls. Priesthoods resume public functions. Offerings move once more through institutions that had been weakened, redirected, or neglected. The most explicit statement of this reversal survives on the restoration stela associated with Tutankhamun. Its language describes Egypt in a state of sacred disorder. Temples had fallen into ruin. Sanctuaries were abandoned. The gods had turned away from the land. Armies sent abroad failed because divine support had been lost. The young king presents himself as the ruler who repairs temples, restores statues, renews offerings, reorganizes priesthoods, and returns the country to harmony. The text is invaluable, but it is not a neutral report. Restoration inscriptions exaggerate the damage of the previous regime because the new ruler gains legitimacy by repairing it. Akhenaten had portrayed Akhetaten as a sacred beginning, unlike anything before it. Tutankhamun's government portrays the return of the old gods as the recovery of a world brought close to collapse. Both sides shape history into political theology. Even so, the restoration stela confirms that Akhenaten's policies had disrupted major institutions deeply enough to require a public response. Temples needed resources. Cult images and inscriptions required repair. Priestly offices had to be re-established or reorganized. The country's relationship with its gods had become a problem of state. Tutankhamun's reign attempts to solve that problem without completely erasing every trace of Amarna at once. The art of his early years still carries elongated forms, soft bodies, and elements of the visual style developed under Akhenaten. Objects from his tomb show artists moving gradually toward older conventions rather than abandoning Amarna aesthetics overnight. Some scenes preserve an intimacy and fluidity that would have looked familiar in Akhetaten. The royal court itself contains people who had served the previous regime. A senior official at Amarna, remains powerful and eventually becomes pharaoh. Horemheb, a military commander who later claims to have restored order, also rises within the post-Amarna state. The political transition depends partly upon experienced officials whose careers cross the religious divide. This continuity complicates the image of a clean revolution followed by an equally clean counter-revolution. The men who helped dismantle Akhenaten's system are not all outsiders returning from exile. Some had prospered within the world he created. Akhetaten begins to lose its purpose as the court departs. A city founded around one king, one god, and one sacred family cannot easily survive when the monarchy relocates and official favor changes direction. Temple offerings diminish, administrative offices close, elite households are abandoned. Workshops lose access to patrons and supply networks. Residents remove useful objects, doors, timber, stone, tools, and stored goods before leaving. The abandonment is not necessarily one sudden flight. Different districts empty at different rates. Some people may remain for years, maintaining houses, reusing buildings, or scavenging materials. Small communities later occupy parts of the site. Yet Akhetaten ceases to function as the capital for which it was designed. Its sacred geography becomes politically useless. The boundary stelae still mark the cliffs. The royal road still crosses the plain. The great Aten temple remains open to the sky, but Aten's chosen ruler is dead. The royal family has dispersed, and state resources now flow elsewhere. Sunlight continues to fill the courts, indifferent to the absence of worshippers. Then dismantling begins. At Karnak, thousands of talatat from Akhenaten's Aten temples are taken apart and reused as filling inside later pylons and gateways. At Amarna, stone elements are removed for construction elsewhere. Statues are broken, reliefs are damaged, cartouches are attacked. The material language of the revolution is converted into raw building supply. This destruction is practical as well as ideological. Fine stone is valuable. Transporting prepared blocks can be easier than quarrying new ones. Yet the choice to dismantle Akhenaten's monuments also serves a political purpose. The buildings that had proclaimed Aten's supremacy are made invisible inside monuments dedicated to restored gods and later kings. Under Ai, the return to traditional religion continues, though his own Amarna connections make his position ambiguous. He conducts Tutankhamun's burial rituals and succeeds him, but his reign is brief. Horemheb follows and pushes the restoration further. Horemheb presents himself as the ruler who repairs a damaged state. He issues decrees against administrative corruption, reorganizes institutions, and aligns himself firmly with the traditional gods. His inscriptions largely ignore the Amarna rulers who came before him. In later official chronology, he appears to succeed Amenhotep III directly, compressing or eliminating the reigns of Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, Neferuaten, Tutankhamun, and A from the ideal royal sequence. This is not mere omission. It is an act of historical control. Egyptian king lists are not complete archival records in the modern sense. They are ritual and political selections of legitimate predecessors. To exclude a ruler is to deny that ruler a place within the sacred chain of kingship. Akhenaten's name, already associated with an attack upon divine memory, now becomes a name unworthy of preservation. Later documents may refer to him indirectly as the criminal, the rebel, or the enemy from Akhetaten rather than speak his royal name. His monuments are usurped or destroyed. His reign is treated as an interruption that proper history should pass over. The Ramesside kings continue this process. Seti I and Rameses II restore temples, rebuild inscriptions, and use materials taken from Amarna period constructions. The official king lists of Abydos and elsewhere omit Akhenaten and his immediate successors. The dynasty repairs its connection to the gods by controlling which ancestors are allowed to exist in public memory. The irony is severe. Akhenaten had attacked Amun's name because names preserve divine presence. His successors apply the same logic to him. They cut away his identity, dismantle his images, and deny him ritual remembrance. The man who attempted to erase the gods becomes a ruler erased by kings, but the erasure cannot be complete. Talatat hidden inside later pylons survive precisely because they were reused. Buried foundations preserve temple plans. Desert conditions protect abandoned houses, workshops, rubbish deposits, and fragments of wall painting. The cliffs retain boundary stelae that still proclaim Akhenaten's vows. Diplomatic tablets remain in ruined administrative buildings. Tombs keep scenes of the royal family beneath Aten's rays, even when faces and names are damaged. Tutankhamun's own burial preserves another layer of accidental memory. Because his tomb remains largely intact until modern discovery, objects connected with the post-Amarna transition survive in extraordinary numbers. Some bear traces of earlier ownership or altered inscriptions, revealing how royal equipment moved between rulers during the confused succession. The king meant to symbolize restoration becomes the most famous surviving witness to the dynasty Egypt tried to forget. The old gods return because their temples, rituals, communities, and memories extend far beyond one reign. Atenism had concentrated its strength too narrowly around Akhenaten and his capital. Once royal support disappeared, the system lacked the institutional depth needed to survive. Yet it does not vanish completely in the moment of defeat. Its artistic innovations linger, its objects are reused, its people continue their careers, its questions remain buried in stone. Egypt succeeds in removing Akhenaten from official history for more than 3,000 years. It does not succeed in making him disappear. For more than 3,000 years, Akhenaten remains where his successors intended him to remain outside the official memory of Egypt. His city loses its name, its temples collapse into low mounds, wind-driven sand gathers in abandoned rooms, mud brick walls soften beneath rare rain and generations of exposure. Farmers cultivate the narrow green land near the river, while the desert preserves foundations beyond the reach of the flood. Travellers pass the cliffs without understanding the damaged figures carved there. Stone blocks from Aten temples disappear into later buildings, carrying fragments of hands, faces, offerings, and sun rays inside walls no one associates with the forgotten king. Akhenaten does not survive through an unbroken religious community. No secret order preserves Atenism through the centuries. No reliable tradition connects his theology directly to later monotheistic faiths. He survives because destruction is never as complete as those who order it imagine. The city now called Amarna gradually returns to historical awareness through ruins, inscriptions, illicit excavation, scholarly survey, and chance discovery. European travellers and early Egyptologists record tombs cut into the eastern cliffs. Hieroglyphs reveal royal names unfamiliar from the accepted king lists. The strange figures on the walls do not resemble the idealized pharaohs already known from other monuments. Here is a king with an elongated face and softened body, accompanied everywhere by a queen and daughters beneath a disk whose rays end in hands. The images seem to belong to another Egypt. During the 19th century, copies of the Amarna tomb scenes begin circulating among scholars. Then, in 1887, clay tablets reportedly emerge from the ruins after local people discover them. The circumstances of the find are imperfectly recorded, as happens so often in the early history of archaeology. Dealers scatter the tablets among museums and collections before their full significance is understood. When scholars begin reading them, the abandoned city suddenly opens onto the political world of the Late Bronze Age. The tablets preserve royal correspondence in Akkadian cuneiform rather than Egyptian hieroglyphs. They contain letters from Babylonia, Mitanni, Assyria, Hatti, Cyprus, and the city-states of the Levant. Akhenaten's capital is no longer merely a strange religious settlement. It is revealed as the administrative centre of an international empire. Excavation exposes more of the city: houses, workshops, palaces, temples, administrative buildings, and tombs emerge from the desert. Archaeologists recover painted plaster, pottery, tools, moulds, beads, sculpture, glass, faience, food remains, and fragments of ordinary domestic life. The city becomes one of the most valuable archaeological landscapes in Egypt precisely because it was occupied so briefly. Akhetaten preserves a concentrated record of one reign and its immediate aftermath. In 1912, excavators working in the studio of the sculptor Thutmose uncover the painted bust of Nefertiti. Its discovery transforms modern interest in the Amarna period. The Queen's image becomes globally recognizable, detached from the workshop debris and political theology that once surrounded it. Her beauty is reproduced on posters, book covers, jewellery, museum advertisements, and screens. While her identity and final fate remain uncertain, Akhenaten attracts a different kind of fascination. He's portrayed as a visionary, fanatic, philosopher, poet, pacifist, tyrant, iconoclast, family man, political reformer, and religious genius. Each age creates the Akhenaten it expects to find. Some modern writers celebrate him as an enlightened individual who rejected superstition and discovered one universal god. Others condemn him as an authoritarian ruler who damaged Egypt's institutions, neglected foreign affairs, and placed personal obsession above the stability of the state. Neither portrait is sufficient. The romantic Akhenaten often depends upon reading the great hymn to the Aten as if it were the private spiritual testimony of a modern believer. Its language is undeniably expansive. Aten awakens humans and animals, nourishes distant lands, creates diversity among peoples, and sustains every living thing beneath the sun. The hymn can sound strikingly universal, especially when separated from the monument surrounding it, but the theology is inseparable from kingship. Aten's universal light does not create equal religious access. Akhenaten remains the one who truly knows the god. Officials praise the king as their source of life and advancement. The royal family occupies the space once filled by numerous divine figures. Atenism narrows sacred authority into a structure controlled by the palace. This is why scholars continue to argue over the word monotheism. If monotheism means the claim that only one god truly exists, parts of Akhenaten's later program may appear to approach it. Other divine names are suppressed. Aten is elevated as universal creator. The plural language of gods can be attacked. Traditional cult images disappear from official art. Yet Atenism develops gradually and retains concepts inherited from older solar religion. The early Aten title includes established deities. Traditional practices continue in households and burials. The king's system does not produce a surviving philosophical statement clearly denying the existence of every other divine power in terms familiar from later monotheistic traditions. Some scholars therefore prefer monolatry, the exclusive worship of one god, without necessarily denying that others exist. Others emphasize henotheism, in which one deity is elevated above all others. Still others describe Atenism as royal solar theology, a cult of the visible sun, or a political monopoly over divine mediation. The labels clarify different aspects, but none resolves every contradiction. Akhenaten may have pursued the closest thing Egypt had yet seen to exclusive state worship of a single universal deity. That does not make him automatically the inventor of monotheism, and it does not prove a direct line of influence from Amarna to later Israelite religion. Comparisons between the great hymn to the Aten and biblical psalms have inspired long debate, particularly because both praise the Creator through images of nature, animals, daylight, and dependence upon divine provision. Similarity, however, is not proof of borrowing. Hymns to solar and creator gods across the ancient Near East often use shared observations about light and life. No surviving evidence securely demonstrates that the authors of later Hebrew texts possessed Akhenaten's hymn or inherited Atenism as a religious tradition. Attempts to identify Akhenaten with Moses, or to make one the teacher of the other, belong largely to speculative modern reconstruction. They can be culturally influential without being archaeologically established. Chronology, transmission, and textual evidence remain serious obstacles. The responsible conclusion is not that influence is impossible in every form, but that the evidence does not justify presenting it as fact. Akhenaten's most demonstrable legacy lies elsewhere. His reign shows how quickly a powerful state can attempt to reorganize sacred memory. Names can be made illegal in official space. Temples can lose wealth, art can be redesigned, a capital can be founded to embody a ruler's vision, officials can adjust their language, families can move, and thousands of workers can build a new reality within a few years. It also shows the limits of that power. The pharaoh can damage Amun's name on stone, but he cannot remove Amun from every household memory, personal name, local ritual, and institutional network across Egypt. He can center worship upon Aten, but he cannot supply the new religion with generations of accumulated tradition. He can declare a desert landscape sacred, but he cannot guarantee that future kings will remain there. He can make himself the sole interpreter of divine truth, but that makes the system dangerously dependent upon his survival. Akhenaten's experiment fails politically because it is too closely bound to Akhenaten. Yet failure does not make it meaningless. For a short time, one of the ancient world's most stable civilizations permits its sacred vocabulary to be rewritten. The gods who had filled Egypt's temples for centuries are pushed towards silence. The king's family becomes the center of creation. Open courts replace hidden sanctuaries. The visible sun becomes the dominant face of divine power. Then the experiment is reversed. The buildings dismantled and the ruler condemned. Modern archaeology restores neither Akhenaten's victory nor his enemy's complete triumph. It reveals a more difficult legacy and unfinished religious transformation. A city populated by real workers and families, a theology caught between universal creation and royal control, and a king whose certainty remains visible even though his motives cannot be recovered. He is not securely the first monotheist. He is not merely a madman. He is not a modern reformer born in the wrong age. He is an Egyptian pharaoh working within ancient traditions and pushing them toward an exclusivity they were not built to sustain. The scars left by his chisels remain because they mark more than destruction. They record the moment when Egypt's gods lost their names, and the moment Egypt discovered that even a king could not keep them silent forever. The desert at Amarna grows quiet again. The palaces are roofless now. The painted floors have faded into fragments, and the broad royal road carries no chariots beneath the morning sun. Where priests once arranged offerings on rows of altars, shadows move slowly across exposed foundations. The eastern cliffs still catch the first light, just as they did when Akhenaten looked toward them and imagined a horizon belonging only to Aten. The sun itself remembers nothing. It rises over Amun's restored temples and Akhenaten's abandoned city with equal indifference. It touches the names that survived, the names that were recarved, and the empty spaces where names were deliberately removed. Human beings supply the memory. They decide which ruler belongs in a list, which god deserves an offering, which ruin should be excavated, and which broken image can be made to speak again. Akhenaten tried to narrow eternity to one radiant source. His successors tried to narrow history so that he had never ruled. Neither effort succeeded completely. What remains is scattered a clay letter, a damaged face, a ring carrying a royal name, a household amulet hidden beneath official theology, the bones of someone who carried stone through the heat, and a hymn praising light across every land. None preserves the whole story. Together, they show how fragile even the most absolute vision can be. Civilizations often appear permanent from within. Their temples seem immovable. Their rituals feel older than time. Their rulers carve promises into stone because stone appears stronger than memory. Yet cities empty, gods fall silent, and royal certainty becomes an archaeological question handled carefully beneath laboratory light. Akhenaten's revolution lasted only a small moment within Egypt's immense history. Still, That moment opened a fracture wide enough for the future to see inside. Through it appears a civilization debating power, belief, family, death, and the dangerous possibility that the sacred world might be remade. Beyond the ruins, evening settles over the plain. The cliffs darken, the river continues north. For a few final minutes, sunlight rests upon the broken walls of Akhetaten, and the city built for one eternal god becomes what all vanished cities eventually become, a memory held between earth and sky, waiting for someone to notice where the names are missing.